In the vast multiverse of Naruto, countless twists shape the story of the young, spirited Jinchuriki. From tragic origins to godlike powers, these changes ripple through time, creating alternate realities where Naruto finds himself loved, feared, or transformed by powers beyond reckoning. Among all these events, none is more pivotal than the fabled Night of the Forbidden Scroll. This single incident has splintered countless possibilities, gifting Naruto powers of the gamer, reuniting him with lost kin, surrounding him with allies, or even blessing him with greater strength from realms unseen. In both canon and countless fan imaginings, the Scroll of Seal's Night remains the ultimate turning point for Uzumaki Naruto. But this story diverges long before the Night of the Scroll. In a twist of fate, Naruto stumbles upon a sight no child should ever witness: the harrowing aftermath of Konoha's darkest hour, the Uchiha massacre. It's known as the most infamous betrayal since Madara Uchiha himself, a tale of brutal betrayal that left the proud Uchiha clan in ruin. In one night, Itachi Uchiha became a legend of terror, his massacre sparing only his younger brother, Sasuke. But Sasuke did not escape unscarred. Traumatized by a sinister technique, he was left with a relentless, festering desire for revenge. The rumors around that night scarcely reflect the whole truth, and for our story, it doesn't need to. This isn't about Sasuke, the dark-haired avenger driven to reclaim his clan's lost honor. No, this is about Naruto. A bold, mischievous blonde who, perhaps unwisely, decides that tonight would be perfect for a little prank on his brooding classmate. A prank driven by Naruto's playful spirit, unaware that this night will forever alter the course of his destiny. The night was still, a quiet and heavy calm settling over the Uchiha district as Naruto Uzumaki, barely 7 years old, scaled the walls with surprising skill and determination. In the dim light, shadows clung to the alleys and darkened doorways, giving Naruto the cover he needed. His goal was simple: get back at that teen Sasuke for humiliating him earlier at the academy. Just thinking about the smug look on Sasuke's face made Naruto's cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. Earlier that day, Naruto had been itching to prove himself in sparring class. He was sick of being ignored or laughed at, and he knew this would be the perfect opportunity to show everyone, especially Sakura-chan, that he wasn't just the class clown. But things didn't exactly go as he'd planned. Earlier that day, outside the academy. The academy day had been the same as always: homeroom, history lessons, weapon practice, and finally sparring before lunch. Naruto had spent most of the morning practicing moves in his head, ready to surprise everyone with his fighting spirit. When it came time to spar, he was paired with none other than Sasuke Uchiha, the pride of their class. As they took their positions, the excited cries of "Sasuke-kun" from several girls filled the air, echoing around the training yard. Naruto noticed Sakura among them, her eyes starry with admiration as she gazed at Sasuke. Today's the day I wipe that smug look off Sasuke's face, Naruto thought, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. But before he knew it, the match began and ended just as quickly. Sasuke had easily sidestepped Naruto's every attempt, his movements fluid and almost mocking. He dodged Naruto's attacks with barely a flicker of effort, all the while wearing that arrogant smirk. A few more hits, and Naruto found himself face down on the ground, bruised, his pride wounded as Sasuke received the point for the takedown. "Like you could ever beat Sasuke-kun. Just give up," yelled a classmate, the insults cutting deeper than the bruises. Naruto struggled to his feet, defiance flaring in his eyes. He wasn't going to let Sasuke win that easily. Giving a quick thumbs up to his teacher, "Iruka," he declared, "I'm good, sensei. Just watch next time, I'll knock him down for sure." Iruka looked doubtful but allowed them to continue. As they squared off again, Naruto could feel Sasuke's mocking gaze boring into him. He swung with all his might, but Sasuke ducked and twisted, slipping behind Naruto with lightning speed before delivering a knee to Naruto's forehead. Stars burst in Naruto's vision as he stumbled back, clutching his head. "Give it up, dope," Sasuke taunted, a cold, calculating gleam in his eyes. Ignoring the throbbing pain, Naruto charged forward with renewed determination, hoping to get a single hit. But Sasuke continued to dodge every blow effortlessly, barely breaking a sweat. The crowd cheered Sasuke on, girls calling his name, their voices dripping with adoration. And then, just as Naruto threw a desperate kick, Sasuke swept his legs out from under him, sending Naruto crashing to the ground. The match ended with Sasuke as the clear victor, and Naruto could only lie there, gasping for air, feeling the sting of both the bruises and his own failure. Sasuke walked back to the group, his fan club eagerly surrounding him with praises and offers of handkerchiefs, leaving Naruto alone on the sidelines. As the crowd cheered for Sasuke, Naruto clenched his fists, his mind already racing with plans for revenge. "I'll get him back for this," he thought, barely containing his anger. Sasuke's not gonna know what hit him. Uchiha compound, later that night. Back in the dark Uchiha district, Naruto prowled through the shadows, a bag of prank supplies slung over his shoulder. This was going to be the prank to end all pranks, he thought with satisfaction. But as he wandered deeper into the compound, something felt off. There were no lights, no sounds of anyone in the bustling Uchiha district, which normally teemed with life. "Where is everybody?" Naruto muttered, his voice barely a whisper in the eerie silence. He glanced around, noticing dark, wet stains on the ground near a building, but he couldn't make out what they were in the dim light. Then, a sudden, chilling presence stopped him cold. A dark figure loomed above, perched on the rooftop, silhouetted against the moonlight. The figure was cloaked, with a single glowing red eye visible through a strange mask. Naruto's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" he stammered, barely able to breathe as the figure silently watched him. The figure tilted its head, and an eerie, mocking chuckle echoed from its position. "A lost little lamb, stumbling into the slaughter," the man said softly, his voice laced with a sinister calm. Naruto stumbled back, his heart pounding wildly. The man vanished in an instant, reappearing right in front of him, a glinting blade in hand. Naruto froze, fear rooting him to the spot as the man's shadow loomed over him. But just as the blade descended, Naruto tripped, stumbling away from the attack and landing painfully on the ground. A crack echoed as the man's blade buried itself into the stone wall where Naruto's head had been mere seconds ago. Naruto gasped, scrambling backward as he realized the man had been trying to kill him. His hand slipped in a sticky, dark substance on the ground, and he realized with horror that it was blood, pooled around the bodies of Uchiha clan members. Paralyzed with fear, Naruto turned to see the masked man advancing on him, a menacing glint in his eye. "Maybe I'll take a limb, just to make things easier later," the man mused, raising his blade once more. "Please, please don't," Naruto choked out, covering his face with his hands. The masked man hesitated for a moment, savoring the boy's terror, before stepping forward to make the final strike. Then, another figure appeared, speaking quietly but firmly. "It's time to leave. The ANBU will be here soon," he said, his tone carrying a strange mix of authority and indifference. The masked man glanced back, an almost disappointed expression flashing across his face. He turned to Naruto once more, raising his blade to make a shallow cut across the boy's cheek. Naruto screamed as the searing pain burned through him, blood trickling down his face. "A parting gift, child. Don't worry, I'll come back to visit." With that, the masked man vanished into the night, leaving Naruto trembling and alone in the darkened street. The second figure, cloaked in gray ANBU armor, approached Naruto's shaking form. He observed the boy's tear-streaked face with a look of muted sympathy. Realizing Naruto wouldn't remember the incident clearly, he pressed a small needle into Naruto's neck, allowing him to slip into unconsciousness. As Naruto's body relaxed, the ANBU operative muttered a quick jutsu, gently adjusting the boy's memories of the traumatic night. A flicker of pity crossed the man's face as he prepared to leave, his gaze lingering on Naruto for a moment. "Poor child," he whispered, before disappearing into the shadows. When Naruto finally regained consciousness days later, he awoke to find the third Hokage waiting for him, his expression solemn. As the Hokage shared the tragic news, Naruto struggled to process what he had stumbled into that night. The entire Uchiha clan had been slaughtered. Yet, try as he might, Naruto could only recall fragments, blurry glimpses of a shadowed figure and a surge of unbearable pain, with the rest lost in a haze of fear and helplessness. After a few attempts to jog his memory, the Hokage relented, leaving Naruto to rest, aware that the boy needed time to adjust to the new reality he'd awakened to. Naruto absently traced the bandages over the right side of his face, the Hokage's words echoing in his mind. His eye had been damaged beyond repair, there was nothing left but an empty socket beneath the bandages now. Left alone, Naruto stared blankly, feeling the weight of everything that had changed. The Uchiha were gone, his eye was gone, and a deep, foreboding certainty whispered that the man who had done this to him would one day return. Clenching his fists over his covered knees, he felt a surge of determination flare in his remaining eye. "I won't be helpless next time. I'll get stronger." This resolve embedded itself firmly in his mind, and he finally allowed himself to drift back into sleep. For now, he needed rest. But from that day forward, Naruto's resolve hardened. There were monsters in the world, and he would be ready for them. The path to recovery was grueling, yet he pressed forward with fierce determination. Throwing himself into his studies and physical training, he clawed his way up the ranks until he was solidly in the middle of his class. But even with his intense efforts, he lacked the guidance of an experienced teacher, and without it, his strength remained a distant goal. Years later, Naruto sat alone on the academy swing, watching from afar as the graduates celebrated with their families. He stared at the ground, dejection clear in his downcast expression. His eyes burned, but he refused to let his tears fall. Why? Why is that stupid jutsu so damn difficult? His thoughts fumed with frustration and self-doubt. The Bunshin no Jutsu, a basic E-rank clone technique required to pass, was the only thing holding him back from graduation. Though he managed to score decently on the written portion, the Jutsu segment weighed the heaviest, accounting for 2/3 of the final grade. And once again, it had cost him his chance. From nearby, the chatter of proud parents and their successful children felt like a distant echo. "I did it. I passed. Great job, honey. We're celebrating tonight." Hearing this only deepened Naruto's sense of failure, but beneath the cheers, he picked up on the quieter, sneering whispers. "Did you see him over there? Failed again," one woman murmured. "Good riddance. He doesn't belong here anyway," another replied with a disdainful sneer. "Blasted dem. SHH. Don't forget the law," her friend hissed, reminding her of the third Hokage's rule. With that, they herded their children away, leaving Naruto alone once more. "The law, again," Naruto muttered to himself. He'd heard it countless times but had no idea what they meant. It only added to the weight pressing down on him as he watched the crowd dissipate, parents and children retreating to celebrate without a second glance in his direction. Resigned, he was about to head home when he sensed someone approach. Turning, he saw his teacher, Mizuki, wearing a gentle, sympathetic smile. "No luck this time, huh?" Mizuki said, feigning sympathy. Naruto looked down. "No, but I'm not giving up. I'll pass next time, for sure," he declared, trying to muster his usual defiance. A small smirk crept over Mizuki's face. "Well, I might know a way you can pass, if you are interested." He gestured for Naruto to follow, and together they left the academy grounds, Mizuki whispering details of a secret exam that might finally help him succeed. Naruto sprinted home, heart pounding with excitement. Mizuki-sensei's extra credit exam didn't seem all that hard. Sneak into the Hokage Tower, grab a special scroll from a records room, then escape to the western woods and learn a technique from it. Finally, he'd wait there for Mizuki to check his results at nightfall. Simple, direct, and perfect for him. Back at his apartment, Naruto dressed for stealth. He donned a black long-sleeved shirt, black pants, and a dark bandana to cover his bright blonde hair. After adding a grappling hook, lockpicks, a glass cutter, and a few other essentials to a small pack, he checked himself in the mirror, briefly touching the dark cloth eye patch over his empty right eye socket. Determined, he secured his apartment, then darted into the evening shadows toward the Hokage tower, timing his approach with the guard's shift change. Upon reaching the tower, he crouched in the shadows cast by a nearby water tower, watching as the day guards walked out the main entrance, chatting with their replacements. Smiling to himself, Naruto edged toward the rear of the tower, his grappling hook ready. He swung it upward, expertly catching the railing of a third-floor balcony, a resting area for tower employees, if he remembered correctly, and conveniently positioned just below the records room he needed. He tugged the rope to test it, then climbed up quickly and secured his rope out of sight as two guards rounded the corner below. Naruto exhaled slowly, steadying himself, then tiptoed toward the propped-open door leading into the building. He stashed his grappling hook and some heavier tools behind a potted plant and crept inside, his senses alert to any approaching footsteps. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, and he took advantage of the dim lighting to blend in as he moved down the hallway and slipped into a stairwell. Navigating up a floor, he reached a short, quiet hallway lined with doors. The middle door bore the room number Mizuki had provided. Hard hammering, Naruto tested the handle locked, as expected. He pulled out his lockpicks and set to work, feeling a thrill as he deftly worked the tumblers. The door clicked open. Inside, shelves upon shelves of scrolls greeted him, arranged by size and label. After a quick scan of the visible shelves, he realized the oversized scroll he sought was probably stored in one of the secured storage closets in the back. Each closet was about the size of a walk-in, and each, naturally, was locked. Starting with the leftmost closet, Naruto worked methodically, picking the sensitive locks and searching through each storage space. By the time he reached the final closet, he was scowling, muttering under his breath about his luck. But when he opened it, there it was, a massive 3-foot scroll that radiated an aura of secrecy. Naruto touched the scroll lightly, straining to sense any traps but finding none. He hoisted the scroll onto his shoulder, marveling at the simplicity of his mission so far. "Is this really supposed to be a secret exam?" he murmured. "This thing's way too easy to grab." With the scroll secured, Naruto headed for the door, planning his exit strategy. But the moment he opened it, he froze. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. The guards' rounds had brought them to this floor. He ducked back, letting the door fall almost shut, and listened as they approached. He couldn't afford to risk being spotted, not with this scroll. Taking a deep breath, he waited for the footsteps to recede, then slid out and darted to the opposite stairwell, sneaking down to the balcony. There, he quickly secured the scroll with a strap, slinging it across his back. After retrieving his rope, he tied it to the balcony railing, ready to descend. He rappelled down the side of the building in record time, landing softly in the shadows. Tugging sharply, he released the knot, coiled his rope, and slipped into the narrow street across from the tower. His grin spread wide as he sprinted toward the western forest, his mind racing with thoughts of the jutsu he would learn. Unbeknownst to him, a figure in the shadows watched him leave, a dark smirk stretching across his face. Naruto reached the forest clearing Mizuki had specified, his breath heavy with excitement. Setting the scroll down, he quickly unrolled it, his eyes widening at the endless list of techniques recorded within. He scanned the scroll, settling on a technique that immediately caught his eye: Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, a shadow clone jutsu leagues more advanced than the basic Bunshin. "All right," he said, "let's see if I can pull this off." With intense concentration, He formed the hand seals, focusing his chakra. He hadn't attempted anything this advanced before, but the thrill of learning something so powerful pushed his hesitation aside. Pouring his energy into the technique, he visualized himself splitting into multiple forms, each with substance and strength. Shadow Clone Jutsu, he shouted, feeling a sudden surge of chakra flow through him. In an instant, 3 perfect copies of himself appeared in the clearing. They blinked back at him, mirroring his grin. Whoa, he breathed. It actually worked. He let out a triumphant laugh, admiring his clones as they moved and breathed as he did. This jutsu felt like it was made for him. No longer would he be hampered by the Bunshin no Jutsu. He'd finally found something that could give him an edge. Perfect, he said, dismissing the clones with a snap of his fingers. He leaned back against a tree, staring up at the stars with a newfound confidence. I'll finally pass, and no one will look down on me again. Hours passed as he studied more jutsu from the scroll, memorizing techniques that would amaze his teachers and peers alike. He was lost in thought when the sound of hurried footsteps snapped him to attention. Mizuki appeared, his smile wide as he approached Naruto. Good job, Naruto, Mizuki said. I knew you could do it. Did you learn something? Naruto nodded, holding back a grin. Yeah, I got one down already. Excellent. You're going to be an amazing ninja, Mizuki praised, his voice unusually warm. Now, there's one more thing you should know. But before he could continue, another figure arrived, Iruka-sensei, his face a mixture of anger and worry. Naruto, he shouted, his voice harsh with urgency. What are you doing here? Naruto's heart sank. Iruka-sensei. Mizuki's face twisted, his smile warping into a smirk. Looks like the party's been crashed. His tone dripped with malice as he reached into his pouch, pulling out a shuriken. Iruka was going to interfere, so I had to make sure he wouldn't stop me. Iruka's eyes widened, and he moved to shield Naruto. Naruto, listen to me. Mizuki tricked you. He told you this was an exam, but it's a trap. He wants to steal the scroll. Naruto staggered back, the weight of Iruka's words hitting him. Mizuki laughed coldly. That's right, Naruto. This scroll contains forbidden techniques, powerful enough to make any ninja unstoppable. And now, you've made it easy for me to get it. A surge of rage filled Naruto. You lied to me, he shouted, clutching the scroll tightly. The thought of all his hard work being twisted for Mizuki's greed made his blood boil. Mizuki sneered, his gaze darkening. You're nothing but a tool, Naruto. A monster, like everyone says. You're just a demon fox in disguise. Naruto's heart skipped a beat as Mizuki's words settled over him like a dark cloud. Iruka moved in front of him, blocking Mizuki's view. Don't listen to him, Naruto, he said, his voice firm. You're not a monster. You're one of us, a ninja of the leaf. Mizuki scowled. Iruka, get out of the way. But Iruka held his ground, facing Mizuki with a fierce determination Naruto had never seen before. Naruto, run. I'll handle this. Naruto clenched his fists. Memories of struggling to pass, feeling alone, and being hurt rushed through him. Yet now, in this dark moment, Iruka stood beside him, willing to protect him. No, Naruto whispered, drawing on every ounce of his resolve. I'm not running. Not anymore. Focusing his chakra, Naruto formed the hand seals once more. Shadow Clone Jutsu, he shouted, and dozens of clones filled the clearing, each one facing Mizuki with unwavering resolve. Mizuki's confident smirk faltered as Naruto's clones closed in, their punches and kicks landing with unrelenting force. Within moments, Mizuki lay defeated, his twisted plans shattered by the very student he had tried to manipulate. Iruka watched in awe, then smiled. Naruto, you did it? Naruto approached, his expression filled with pride. Thanks, Iruka-sensei. I finally found a jutsu that works for me. Iruka patted his shoulder. You've more than earned your headband, Naruto. Congratulations. As dawn broke over the village, Naruto walked beside Iruka, the enormous scroll secured on his back. He no longer felt like an outcast. He was a ninja, strong, determined, and, for the first time, truly accepted. Western Forest, clearing. A soft breeze blew through the trees of the western forest, rustling the leaves as sunlight filtered through the canopy. The clearing was quiet, save for the occasional chirp of birds or the distant rustle of animals going about their business. Yet, amidst this tranquility, one figure stood in the center, practically buzzing with excitement. Naruto Uzumaki, his messy blonde hair standing out against the background of green and brown, knelt on the ground, eyes gleaming with an almost childlike enthusiasm. In his hands, he held an ancient-looking scroll, slightly crumpled and yellowed from age but still functional. He hummed a jaunty tune as he carefully unrolled it, eager to discover the hidden secrets it contained. This is gonna be awesome, he muttered to himself, practically vibrating with anticipation. His eyes schemed across the ancient text, looking for something, anything, that would give him the edge he craved. He'd been working hard for years, doing his best to prove he was more than just the village outcast, the son of the fourth Hokage, and the holder of the nine tails. Yet, despite all his efforts, nothing had changed. He was still viewed as little more than a demon. Let's see. 8-point seal? What use is that? He scoffed, glancing dismissively at the first technique written on the scroll. He pushed the scroll out further, skipping over several more seals and techniques that held no interest for him. Kage Bunshin? Screw that. I hate that damn technique. He grumbled, recalling all the times he'd failed to properly use the shadow clone jutsu, resulting in countless embarrassing moments. He moved past more jutsu related to shadows, until one word caught his eye. Contract. Contract. Naruto whispered, his curiosity piqued. Like the summoning contract that lets shinobi get stronger? Now we're talking. He sat up straighter, his interest fully engaged as he read further. Shadow contract. A warning was scrawled beneath the heading, a note that seemed to have been added much later than the rest of the scroll, perhaps by one of the earlier Hokage. It was written in a careful, almost cautious script. Warning to those who attempt to sign this contract, unlike a summoning contract, which follows a somewhat general set of standards, the shadow contract requires greater unknown sacrifice. Brought in by the Nara clan at the inception of Konohagakure, we were warned to only attempt this in the direst of circumstances. Only attempt when you are truly willing to make the sacrifice requested by the contract summons, whatever it may be. Naruto scratched his head in confusion, feeling an odd mix of unease and excitement. Dire circumstances? What was that about? But the idea of gaining more power, the ability to form a contract with shadows, was too alluring to resist. The Nara clan had a connection with shadows, right? This could be something huge. He pushed the scroll further down, reaching a newer, hastily scrawled note at the bottom. After speaking with several of the older Nara clan members, there may be a correlation between the contract and the universal laziness that the Nara are known for. Old legends speak of a pact made with a shadowy figure, a deal with a demon, perhaps. Improbable, but it may require future research. Naruto blinked. A demon? That sounds pretty extreme. But his excitement won out. A contract with shadows, huh? That could be exactly what I need. He shook off the unease and refocused on the scroll. Power was power, and that was what mattered in the end. He looked at the strange seal at the center of the scroll, the words shadow contract outlined in bold, and quickly summoned a bit of chakra. There was a faint puff of smoke, and the scroll was gone, leaving him holding the much smaller one that had appeared in its place. This is gonna be awesome. Naruto repeated to himself, hardly able to contain his excitement. He untied the small scroll, unrolling it with great care. It was only about a foot long and 2 inches wide, an odd shape for a contract. As he unfurled it, his eyes scanned the faded signatures of previous summoners. His heart raced with anticipation. So, a contract uses blood and chakra to form a pact, and then it summons a summon. Naruto muttered, still puzzled but intrigued. He could just about make out some of the names and signatures, though many were faded with time. He wondered if the names belonged to famous shinobi, or if they were just ordinary people who had made pacts long ago. He noticed a blank space beneath the last signature, and his eyes narrowed. How do I do this? Fingerprints and signature. I don't have ink. Is that blood? He examined the scroll closely, noticing the reddish hue of the markings. His gut told him that the ink might very well be blood, and he didn't need much more prompting to take the next step. After all, what did he have to lose? Grabbing a kunai from his pouch, Naruto checked the placement again, then pricked his finger with a wince. A drop of blood fell onto the scroll, marking the start of the contract. The wind picked up suddenly, an ominous chill sweeping through the clearing. The shadows around him seemed to shift, darkening, and swirling unnaturally. Naruto spun around, alarmed. He had a feeling something was changing, and it wasn't good. The whispers began. Quiet, almost imperceptible voices that seemed to come from all directions. The boy's grip tightened around his kunai as he whirled, trying to locate the source. New one? Perhaps. Requires approval. King, coming. The words echoed through his mind, but their meaning was unclear. The shadows around him deepened further, and soon the light from the outside world was gone, replaced by a thick, swirling darkness. The boy found himself standing in the center of an eerie mist, unable to see beyond a few feet. The familiar surroundings of the forest had disappeared, replaced by an impenetrable veil of shadow. What the hell is going on? Naruto cried out, panic creeping into his voice as he spun, brandishing the kunai in front of him. I didn't sign up for this. What the hell is happening? As he tried to make sense of his surroundings, the shadows slowly began to coalesce into a single point, gathering around the contract scroll that still lay on the ground. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and a deep, commanding voice finally rose above the rest. Relax, child. You are in no danger from us. Naruto froze in place, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. A chill ran down his spine as he spun to face the source of the voice. Ga! He yelled, his voice breaking as he stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. From the darkness, a figure began to emerge. It was tall and looming, formed from the swirling shadows themselves. Its body was vaguely human-shaped, but its edges were ever-changing, as though it was a collection of mist and smoke given form. The figure's eyes glowed an eerie, brilliant blue, burning like twin stars against the backdrop of darkness. The voice again filled the air, deeper and more resonant now. The Shadow King, young human. Do you not know what you have done? Naruto gulped, his heart racing. What? What do you mean? He stammered, still holding the kunai in front of him as though it might offer some protection. You desired power, correct? A contract with the shadows, the Shadow King continued, its voice carrying an edge of amusement. Naruto blinked, processing the words. His desire for power was the reason he'd opened the scroll in the first place. He'd spent his whole life feeling like an outcast, and this was his chance to change everything. Yeah, that's right. He shouted, suddenly filled with confidence. I want power. I want to be strong, stronger than anyone. What do I need to do to make a deal with you? He demanded, trying to sound as bold as possible. Earn? How refreshing, you humans always demand, but never ask. The figure paused for a moment before continuing. To earn the power of shadows, you must make a great sacrifice. Naruto's stomach sank at the word sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? What could he possibly have that was worth taking? He stood in silence for a moment, trying to think. His eyes scanned the shadows surrounding him, but he didn't see anything that could help him. What could he offer? He didn't have anything of value, nothing material, anyway. He wasn't rich, he didn't have family heirlooms or rare treasures. All he had was his determination, but that wasn't something he could sacrifice. I don't know. I don't have anything to give you, he said, his voice quiet, but steady. The Shadow King seemed to consider this for a moment before responding. We do not ask for material items as sacrifice. Your soul, an emotion, even parts of your very body. Those are the last few sacrifices that were accepted. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. My soul. You want me to give you my soul? He demanded, his voice rising in anger. He didn't care if this thing was powerful or not. There was no way in hell he was going to give up his soul. We do not request the entire thing, only a portion. Enough to bind you to the shadows, enough to make you truly one with them. That is all that is required. Naruto was silent for a moment, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the choice before him. Give away a part of himself in exchange for power. Would it be worth it? After all, his life had been nothing but loneliness and rejection. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to finally take control. Okay, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I'll do it. I'll sacrifice whatever you need. Just give me the power. Konohagakuer. Same time. As Naruto forged his pact with the Shadow King in the secluded western forest, he unknowingly set into motion a crisis within Konohagakuer. The entire village was on edge, as the news spread like wildfire. Uzumaki Naruto had stolen the forbidden scroll of seals. The situation was dire. No one knew how the boy had discovered the scroll's existence, or what his intentions were, but the ramifications were too great to ignore. The scroll contained some of the most dangerous techniques in the ninja world, and if Naruto intended to unlock them, the village could be at risk. Chunin and Jonin alike had mobilized in a desperate search. They knew it was only a matter of time before the scroll was either used or, worse, lost forever to the boy. And if Naruto, already feared and despised by many as the host of the Nine Tails, were to make use of such power, the consequences could be catastrophic. In the midst of the turmoil, Mizuki, a solitary Chunin, broke away from the search patterns, his feet carrying him swiftly toward the western forest. He had his own plans. It had all gone according to his twisted design. Naruto had stolen the scroll, and now, Mizuki would ensure that the boy was taken care of. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could rid Konoha of its demon once and for all. Before Mizuki could get too far, a voice rang out from behind him. Mizuki. Where do you think you're going? We still have 5 more blocks before we head west. Iruka's voice was sharp, laced with a tone of frustration. Mizuki froze, his body tensing. He had hoped to slip away unnoticed, but Iruka had spotted him. With an effort, he masked his irritation, spinning around to face his fellow teacher. Right, of course, Mizuki said with a strained smile, forcing an air of nonchalance. I was just worried about Uzumaki. You know how reckless he can be. His words, though seemingly innocent, were loaded with an underlying animosity. Iruka frowned but nodded in understanding. I get it. But we need to stick to the search patterns. We can't afford to skip any areas he could be hiding in. The one spot we missed. Iruka clapped Mizuki on the shoulder, his hand firm as he gently nudged him back toward their assigned route. The sooner we get this done, the sooner we can head out west to look for him. Let's just stay focused, okay? Mizuki's smile faltered for a moment, his mind raging internally. Damn it, just a few more seconds, and I would have been in the clear. His thoughts were a mix of frustration and urgency. The longer he stayed here, the greater the risk someone would get to Naruto before he could. With a forced sigh, he fell in step beside Iruka, trying to suppress the growing bitterness that burned in his chest. He needed to find an opportunity to break free and get to Naruto before anyone else did. Hokage's tower. Same time. Meanwhile, deep within the Hokage's tower, an elderly man sat alone at his desk, his posture weary. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, had been working late into the night, his tired eyes gazing into a crystal ball placed before him. The ball was empty, nothing more than a smooth, polished surface reflecting his image, but it held the power of a special technique, one that allowed him to view distant locations. Though his thoughts should have been on the paperwork in front of him, the task had proved far more burdensome than usual. The recent graduation ceremony had gone well, but the aftermath had left him swamped with additional administrative duties, pushing his work hours far beyond what he'd anticipated. He had intended to check on Naruto after hearing about the boy's failure to graduate, but the situation had quickly escalated in a way he hadn't predicted. The seal guarding the forbidden scroll had been triggered when it was removed from its storage pedestal. Hiruzen had felt the faint stir of chakra in the air, a nagging sensation in the back of his mind. At first, he had assumed it was a false alarm, but as the minutes passed and the feeling grew stronger, he realized something was terribly wrong. His steps quickened, and within moments he was on the floor below, ready to investigate. But when he arrived at the storage room, the scroll was gone, and the thief had vanished. The Hokage's heart sank. The only clue left behind was the faint trail of a teacher who had been out of place. Mizuki had arrived just 30 minutes later, claiming to have seen Naruto with the scroll, running through the village in a panic. His suspicions were immediately raised, but Mizuki had insisted on waiting for Hiruzen before taking action. Hiruzen's mind briefly wandered to Naruto's recent failure, how the boy, always cheerful and bright despite his burdens, had not passed the graduation exam. Hiruzen had hoped to sit down with him, offer some guidance, maybe even treat him to a meal at the ramen shop to lift his spirits. He had hoped that by easing the boy's frustration, he could help him get back on track. But now, that hope seemed as distant as the village walls themselves. Now, with the forbidden scroll in Naruto's hands, the situation had taken a dangerous turn. Whispers of betrayal and treason had already begun to circulate, and while Hiruzen had ordered that Naruto be brought to him unharmed, there were many in the village who saw him only as the vessel for the Nine Tails, not as the hero he could have been. The Hokage sighed deeply, the weight of his regret pressing on him. He had tried to do right by the boy, but had he failed? Had his attempt to ensure that Naruto was treated with kindness only led to more pain for him? As Hiruzen's mind churned with these thoughts, a sudden, instinctive sense of unease gripped him. Something was amiss. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing a crucial detail. I need to check on Iruka or Mizuki, he thought. His intuition told him that there was more to the situation than met the eye. With a renewed sense of urgency, Hiruzen activated the crystal ball once more, his eyes narrowing as he focused intently. The swirling mists within the ball began to clear, revealing the image of Mizuki, his figure darting between trees with an unmistakable, dark look on his face. The Hokage's heart tightened as he watched Mizuki's every movement. Something wasn't right, and it seemed as though the man was already closing in on his target. Western Forest, clearing. The moonlight barely pierced the dense canopy overhead, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. Deep within the clearing, young Naruto Uzumaki stood alone, the night air heavy with anticipation as he trained tirelessly with the new abilities he had acquired. He had been at it for hours, honing his newfound power, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding in the village. His once reckless determination was now tempered by focus as he worked to master the shadow energy he had inherited from the mysterious Shadow King. His eyes glowed brightly, an unnatural shimmer in the darkness, as he thrust his hand out toward the earth. From the ground, several jagged spikes of shadow erupted, plunging upward in a show of his growing control. Yes. 3 for 3. Finally. Naruto cheered, doing an exuberant victory dance around the clearing, his youthful laughter echoing through the night. Impressive. Fast. Naruto paused mid-celebration, a shiver crawling up his spine. The eerie whispers, the disembodied voices that followed him, had become strangely more coherent as he grew more attuned to the shadow energy. He was used to the disjointed murmurs by now, having grown indifferent to their haunting presence. He flashed a thumbs up at the darkened forest, acknowledging the voices, even if he was the only one who could hear them. That sounds a lot worse than it really is, he thought suddenly, a rain cloud forming over his head. He stood still for a moment, feeling a wave of melancholy wash over him. The voices were starting to feel more like an extension of his thoughts, and the realization was unsettling. Slapping both his cheeks, Naruto shook himself out of his funk. No time for that, he muttered. I've done crazier things already. Nothing to worry about. Alright, what should I call this technique? Shadow style? Black spires? Maybe that's too obvious. He mused, waving off the name dilemma with a casual shrug. There were bigger things to focus on, and one of those things was the mysterious purple stone he had found earlier, the one covered in arcane runes. It seemed to hum with power, a tangible connection to the shadow energy he was learning to manipulate. He pulled the smooth stone from his pocket again and examined it closely. Strange markings covered its surface, twisting in patterns he couldn't make sense of. The stone didn't feel like chakra. No, it was something else entirely, something akin to chakra but distinct like the shadow of chakra itself. Naruto's hand hovered over the stone, his thoughts drifting to how best to use it. He had already noticed that when he infused his chakra into the stone, it responded by glowing faintly, and the shadow energy within him seemed to pulse in response. If he could figure out how to control it better, perhaps he could access even more powerful techniques. With a determined breath, Naruto focused his chakra to his eye, his newly enhanced shadow eye. The feeling was sharp, cold, almost as if he were dipping his very soul into an abyss. The stone began to absorb his chakra, but this time, it felt different. As the stone shifted under his grip, he could feel the energy becoming more volatile, surging within him. Suddenly, the stone cracked apart in his hand, the runes glowing bright before dissolving into a cloud of glowing mist. The mist spiraled upward, circling his head before pouring into his shadowy eye. Whoa, that feels weird, Naruto whispered, blinking rapidly as the world around him seemed to shift. His vision blurred, and a torrent of strange images flashed in his mind, some techniques, maybe even more than one, but they were fleeting, impossible to hold onto. Is this a gift? He thought to himself, shaking his head to clear the dizziness that clouded his senses. He focused on his shadow, the comforting darkness pooling beneath him. He had to test what had just happened. Grabbing a kunai from his pouch, Naruto dropped it into the shadow of his foot. He felt a slight tremor, and then the weapon slipped entirely into the ground, vanishing from view. He reached into the shadow, feeling around, trying to locate the kunai. When his fingers finally brushed against the blade, he yelped, pulling his hand back sharply. Stupid shadow. I wanted the handle. He snapped, irritated that he had grabbed the blade first. A moment of hesitation, then he thrust his other hand into the shadow, slowly and carefully this time, seeking out the hilt. He wrapped his fingers around it and yanked it free. Better, he muttered, wiping a trickle of blood from his palm as he eyed the shadow suspiciously. The technique was starting to grow on him. A few more tries, and he felt like he was getting the hang of it. Every movement felt more natural, less like the awkward fumbling of earlier. He could already see the potential for battle. Imagine if he could store weapons in his shadow, or even hide there himself. Feeling a surge of excitement, He tested the limits of his control, tossing a few small stones into the shadows and watching them vanish with the same smoothness as the kunao. The thrill of success made him grin wider, and soon, he was performing an impromptu juggling act, tossing the stones between his hands and watching them sink into the ground like they were nothing more than smoke. Who's the man? That's right, Uzumaki Naruto. That's who. He shouted with a loud laugh, enjoying the echo of his own voice bouncing off the trees. Little brat. Quiet. Trouble, incoming. Naruto froze. His joy faltered as the whispers suddenly became sharper, more urgent. He scanned the forest around him, heart pounding as he realized the quiet rustling in the brush wasn't the wind. He had company. What is it? Who's there? He demanded, his hand reaching into the shadows for a kunao. His instincts screamed that he needed to be ready, but the sound of movement around him didn't match any shinobi he knew. 3 large wolves emerged from the underbrush, their eyes gleaming in the dim light as they approached with snarls, their bodies tense and coiled. The air thickened as the wolves' presence grew heavier, the promise of violence hanging in the air. They weren't after his shadow, they were after him. Naruto's mind raced. He had been taught in the academy how to trap and kill small game rabbits, mostly. He had no experience with anything like this. Still, his instincts told him this was his chance to test his new abilities. All right, hold still guys. This will be over soon, he said quietly, gathering shadow energy into his body as the wolves slowly circled him. They had made their move, and he couldn't afford to hesitate. With a quick motion, he thrust his hand forward. Inden, Kuro Sento. He yelled, his voice carrying with confidence. Dark, spiked tendrils burst from the wolves' own shadows, impaling them with terrifying speed. For a moment, everything was still. Then, one by one, the wolves crumpled to the forest floor, their forms vanishing into the darkness from which they had come. Naruto waited a beat, breath held, before allowing himself a triumphant fist pump. Hell yeah. Inden, Kuro Sento, success. His voice was quieter now, but the thrill of victory was palpable. He approached the fallen wolves cautiously. However, something seemed off. From the bodies rose a faint, black-blue mist that swirled ominously. The strange images of techniques flashed across his vision once more, dizzying him. Stumbling back, Naruto leaned against a nearby tree, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. The word repeated in his mind, arise. His heart thudded in his chest as he aimed his hand toward the corpses, focusing his will. With a sharp gesture, he clenched his fist. The shadows around him rippled. The mist thickened, swirling around the wolves' corpses, and suddenly, 3 shadowy beasts emerged from the swirling darkness. Their forms were more solid now, their fur matted with mist and their eyes glowing an ominous blue. Naruto's eyes widened. These weren't just reanimated wolves, they had been transformed into something far more dangerous. He could feel the power radiating from them, could sense the heightened strength they now possessed. He took a step back, the implications of what he had just done dawning on him. Could this work on shinobi? He wondered. If he could make a shinobi's shadow his own, could he raise them as powerful shadow soldiers? The thought was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Wait, he muttered to himself. One step at a time. I still have to pass the exam. But the idea of using shadows to create an army of powerful minions filled him with anticipation. These wolves, his minions, were stronger than they had been in life. What else could he do with them? Looking at his newly risen companions, he grinned. This is way better than a stupid clone jutsu, he said, lightly patting the nearest shadow beast, which responded with a low growl of contentment. Pretty badass if I say so myself, Naruto added, watching his beasts preen under his praise. He began testing their abilities, commanding the beasts to sink into his shadow, disappearing from view entirely. Cool. They're even better than the normal ones, he grinned. All right, he sighed with a newfound sense of purpose. Let's see what else I can do. Mizuki was angry. His patience had worn thin, and with every passing second, his frustration grew. Iruka was so annoyingly diligent in the search protocols that Mizuki couldn't find a chance to slip away unnoticed. He had to get to the western forest, where his target awaited. Mizuki was already hours behind schedule, and his irritation made it hard to think clearly. He was moments away from doing something drastic like driving a kunao into Iruka's eye to finally be done with the damn charade. But even in his rage, Mizuki knew he couldn't kill a fellow shinobi in the heart of Konoha. The thought, however, was strangely cathartic. All right, I'm going on ahead, Iruka, Mizuki muttered, his voice rough with barely contained annoyance. But when he looked around, ready to sprint off, he saw that Iruka was nowhere in sight. The roof was empty. Where the hell did he shed? Mizuki cursed, his heart sinking. His impatience must have tipped Iruka off. Realizing that he was on the verge of being caught, he quickly grabbed a scroll from his pouch, unsealing 2 oversized shuriken and placing them on his back. His mind raced as he reached into the pouch once again, this time for a small green vial of poison. It was time to deal with this before Iruka or anyone else got in the way. The Minnow Iruka was a good shinobi. His mission record had been more than respectable, earning the respect of his comrades, even if he now preferred teaching the next generation of shinobi. Over the last decade, his dedication to the academy had turned him into a well-known figure in Konoha, and he had never let his skills dull. But it didn't take a high level of insight to know that Mizuki was hiding something. At first, Iruka had dismissed his suspicion. But as the day wore on, Mizuki's behavior had only grown stranger. The way he constantly looked toward the western forest, as though waiting for something or someone. That didn't sit well with Iruka. Mizuki had always been the laid-back type, never one to show tension, but today? Today was different. And Iruka was no fool. Wanting to give his old friend the benefit of the doubt, Iruka had stuck by Mizuki as they scoured the northern sections, but when Mizuki had grumbled about continuing the search on his own, Iruka saw an opportunity to slip away. His gut told him something was wrong, and he wasn't about to let it go. After 30 minutes of careful tree jumping, Iruka finally arrived at the clearing in the western forest, where he spotted the missing child. The boy was covered in dirt, his black outfit nearly blending into the shadows of the trees. But it was the telltale whisker marks on his cheeks that gave him away. Naruto. Iruka called out softly, landing on the ground in front of the boy. Naruto, who had been lying prone, jumped up, a look of disbelief on his face. Wa-sensei. You found me already? Iruka didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on Naruto's form, taking in the signs of exhaustion. The boy was panting heavily, and the ground around him was littered with gouges and deep marks, signs of harsh training. Even the shed behind him was damaged. Iruka blinked in confusion, his hand reaching out instinctively to touch Naruto's shoulder. What the hell happened here? He asked, his voice strained. Naruto, ever the innocent, gave a sheepish grin, brushing dirt from his hands. Oh, you know. I been training. I passed the secret exam, right? I grabbed the scroll like I was supposed to, but I didn't learn a jutsu from it. But I came up with my own jutsu. That should count for bonus points, right? Iruka could only stare at the boy, his mind struggling to process what he was saying. There was no secret exam. No bonus points. Either you passed or failed. The boy had clearly gone off the rails. Before Iruka could scold Naruto for his reckless behavior, he heard the unmistakable whistling of projectiles cutting through the air. Without thinking, he threw his hand out to push Naruto away, but to his shock, Naruto didn't duck or flee. Instead, the boy tackled him to the side, sending them both rolling just as a flurry of kunao and shuriken flew past. Holy shit. You okay, sensei? Naruto gasped, his eyes wide with panic. Iruka, still in shock, struggled to regain his composure. And Naruto, how did you know about that? His voice was laced with disbelief. Your reflexes. Before Naruto could answer, the sound of a landing figure interrupted them. Mizuki stood atop a nearby branch, a cruel grin spreading across his face as he gripped one of his oversized shuriken. Impressive, Naruto, Mizuki called out with a twisted smirk. I was expecting to take Iruka out with that, but you saved him instead. How touching. Mizuki. Iruka shouted, trying to step in front of Naruto. What the hell are you doing? Give me the scroll, Naruto, Mizuki demanded, his eyes narrowing. Now. No. Iruka cried, stepping forward. Naruto, get away. He's dangerous. He's been lying to you. The boy, confused and fearful, looked from Mizuki to Iruka. Mizuki-sensei. Mizuki's smile grew even darker. Lies. Oh, Iruka, it's nothing but lies. You've been feeding him lies, haven't you? All these years, the poor boy doesn't even know the truth. Naruto's expression shifted from confusion to fear. What lies? What are you talking about? His voice was trembling. Iruka's heart sank as he realized what Mizuki was trying to do. His mind raced, but before he could react, Mizuki lunged at him, kunao in hand. The two Chunin clashed, their weapons ringing out with each strike. Iruka's thoughts were a blur, but he had no time to think. The only thing that mattered was protecting Naruto. As they fought, Mizuki's words echoed in the air. The demon fox wasn't just sealed away, Iruka. It was sealed into a baby. And that baby is you, Naruto. You are the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Iruka's blood ran cold. The words were like a knife to the heart, but he didn't have time to process it. Mizuki's blade came down, and Iruka barely had time to react before it connected with his side, cutting deep into his flesh. Sensei. Naruto cried, his voice high-pitched with fear. He rushed forward, but before he could reach Iruka, Mizuki threw a kunao toward him. Iruka saw it coming but could do nothing to stop it. The boy's eyes filled with terror as he reached out to his fallen teacher. Sensei, no. Mizuki, grinning from ear to ear, stepped closer. Yes, Iruka. It's all true. The boy you've been protecting is the very same demon who destroyed your family. He's the one who caused all the death, all the destruction. He's the reason why everyone hates him, why you hate him. You've been wasting your time, haven't you? Naruto's heart clenched, his mind spinning. He could barely understand the implications, but the words stung. No, that's not true. I didn't. You caused it all, Naruto, Mizuki hissed, his grin widening as he raised his shuriken. You're nothing but a demon. And now, it's time for you to pay the price. As Mizuki advanced, Iruka struggled to push himself up, but the poison was taking its toll. He could barely hold his head up. Run, Naruto. He croaked, barely able to get the words out. Get away. Naruto froze in place, his mind crashing with the weight of what he had just learned. Mizuki's words echoed in his mind, repeating the accusations over and over again. His hands shook as he clutched the forbidden scroll to his chest. I am the demon. I caused it all. The shadows around him stirred, responding to the turmoil in his heart. He had never felt this lost before, this alone. The very foundation of his identity was crumbling. But then, as the shadows whispered around him, something shifted. A surge of energy, raw and uncontrollable, began to build within him. Memories of Iruka's kindness, of all the moments they had shared together, filled his heart with warmth. Iruka, despite everything, had been his teacher, his protector. The one person who had always believed in him. And now, he was fighting for his life. "I won't let you hurt him," Naruto shouted, his voice full of rage and defiance. Mizuki's grin faltered as he stepped back. "What are you?" Naruto lunged, his body propelled by an anger he hadn't known he possessed. The force of his tackle sent Mizuki sprawling across the ground. As the traitor recovered, Naruto stood tall, his eyes glowing with fury. "Get ready for the real demon," Naruto roared. Hiruzen sat in stunned silence as he watched the academy student, a mere child, unleash an overwhelming torrent of strikes on the captured Chunin, Mizuki. It was like watching a seasoned warrior, the boy's movements sharp and controlled, his anger fueling each blow. For nearly 10 minutes, Naruto pummeled Mizuki, each strike landing with a thundering impact until Mizuki was reduced to a bloody heap on the ground, his body unmoving and clearly incapacitated. Though the situation was dire, a flicker of amusement appeared in Hiruzen's eyes as he witnessed the scene. I always knew Naruto was special, but this, the boy's growth was far beyond anything Hiruzen had expected. He had used the same shadow techniques that were linked to the cage, techniques that many believed only the Hokage could truly master. To think he is capable of wielding such power already? Hiruzen rose from his chair, his expression shifting as he took a moment to compose himself. The boy had always surprised him, but this was different. With the crisis resolved, it was time to ensure that the medics were called in to treat the injured and secure the area. The old Hokage quickly vacated his office, stepping into the corridor, where shinobi were already waiting. As he walked outside to gather the forces, Hiruzen's hand touched the brim of his hat, tilting it forward to conceal the small smile that crept onto his face. "Naruto-kun, you will go far in this world. I have no doubt about that." His grin widened ever so slightly before he composed himself fully and headed out, prepared to manage the aftermath of the battle. Western Forest. Iruka sat against the shed, still stunned by what had just transpired. He could hardly comprehend the sheer force of Naruto's actions. The boy had summoned shadowy beasts, dark, spectral creatures that were not only strong but controlled by him with ease. It was unlike anything Iruka had seen before. And now, as one of those creatures helped support his injured form, Iruka could only watch in awe as Naruto fretted over his condition, his concern genuine and overwhelming. But then, something changed. Iruka noticed it in an instant. Naruto had become unusually quiet. His movements had slowed, his demeanor shifting from frantic to uncertain. The boy stood there, looking down at the ground, his brow furrowed as if he were lost in thought. "Naruto, what's wrong?" Iruka asked, his voice a mix of concern and confusion. The sudden shift in Naruto's mood puzzled him. Naruto hesitated before looking up, his eyes filled with uncertainty. The shadows that had lingered around him earlier vanished as he stiffened, bowing deeply before Iruka. The sudden action caught Iruka off guard. "I'm sorry, Iruka-sensei," Naruto stammered, his voice quivering with guilt. Because of me, you got hurt, and your parents." His voice broke slightly, and Iruka could see the boy fighting back tears. The mention of his parents, his past, seemed to weigh heavy on Naruto's heart, as it always did. Before Iruka could respond, he felt the boy's trembling shoulders under his hands. Gently, he guided Naruto back up to his feet and, with a firm yet kind gaze, spoke the words he knew Naruto needed to hear. "No, Naruto. None of this is your fault," Iruka said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You are not to blame for the Kyuubi. You are not the demon they say you are. You've held that beast inside you, keeping it at bay all these years. You are the greatest guardian this village has ever had." Iruka's expression softened, and his eyes took on a somber note. "I should be the one apologizing. I blamed you, even when I should have known better. After getting to know you, I realized something important. You are not the demon inside you. You are just a boy, a young boy who's had to shoulder a terrible burden, a burden that no one else can truly understand. And despite that, you've never given up. You work harder than anyone I know, always pushing forward, no matter the pain. You are not just a survivor, Naruto. You are a hero. As Iruka spoke, he could see Naruto's eyes welling up with tears, the boy's face flushed with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. The floodgates had opened, and Naruto's emotions poured out in the form of thick, fat tears rolling down his cheeks. His breath caught in his throat as he tried to keep his composure. You are Uzumaki Naruto of Konohagakure, Iruka said, placing a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. And you are a hero I should have seen sooner. The words struck deep. Naruto, overcome with emotion, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, sniffling as he looked up at Iruka. Despite the sorrow, there was something brighter in his eyes now, something that had been missing for so long. Iruka smiled softly, a tear of his own escaping despite his best efforts. Naruto, he said, reaching into his pouch, I have something for you. A gift. Close your eyes for me, okay? Naruto, still unsure but trusting, complied. His heart raced as he felt Iruka's hands gently remove his headband. He didn't understand why, but then he felt a thicker, heavier cloth replaced it. It tightened around his head, the fabric feeling different, somehow stronger. And then he heard the excited, almost jubilant murmurs of the shadows around him. You can open your eyes now. Naruto hesitated, then slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he noticed was the way the sunlight cascaded over Iruka, the morning's golden rays highlighting something unusual. Iruka's forehead was bare, his headband nowhere to be seen. For a moment, Naruto didn't understand. But then, as the realization hit him, his eyes widened in disbelief. Iruka was smiling, no, grinning at him, but this time, it wasn't just a teacher's smile. It was one of pride. Congratulations, Naruto, Iruka said, his voice filled with warmth and joy. You graduate? The words echoed in Naruto's mind, and it felt like everything had come into focus at that very moment. The feeling was overwhelming, and without thinking, Naruto launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around Iruka in a tight hug. Iruka-sensei. Naruto's voice broke as he buried his face in the older man's chest, his heart swelling with joy and relief. He didn't know how to express everything he felt in that moment. He was finally being recognized not as the demon they all feared, but as the boy he'd always wanted to be. Iruka chuckled softly, though he winced slightly from the pain in his side. But he didn't care. He had done his job. He had given Naruto something he had never received before: belief, recognition, and a place where he truly belonged. Naruto, Iruka whispered, holding the boy close, I know you'll do great things in the future. You'll achieve all of your dreams. I believe in you. The words echoed in Naruto's heart, solidifying a promise to himself. He would make Iruka proud. And no matter the challenges ahead, he would never stop fighting for the village that had finally started to believe in him. Western Forest Clearing, morning. It wasn't long after Naruto's intense battle with Mizuki that the Hokage and a team of ANBU appeared on the scene. The air was thick with tension, and Naruto felt his heart racing as masked shinobi surrounded him from all sides. His first instinct was to panic, but the Hokage, ever the calming figure, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The situation had been a whirlwind. The betrayal, the near-death experience with Mizuki, and the sudden revelation of his own secret burden weighed heavily on Naruto's shoulders. But none of that was as terrifying as the dozen masked ANBU, who now encircled him. His breath hitched, but before he could react further, the Hokage spoke in a gentle tone that cut through his rising fear. Calm down, Naruto. These shinobi are here to ensure Mizuki is taken into custody. Naruto nodded shakily, though his eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the whirlwind. As the ANBU swiftly moved to restrain Mizuki, taking him away to meet their interrogator, The Hokage gave Naruto a kind smile. Good work, my boy. You did what needed to be done to protect Iruka, Hiruzen praised, his voice full of warmth despite the grim situation. Naruto's shoulders relaxed slightly at the praise, his tension easing just a little. However, he couldn't escape the growing sense of dread at the thought of facing the Hokage alone. The boy was still nervous, shifting from foot to foot. The elderly Hokage was too kind to yell at him, but Naruto knew there would be consequences for what he had done, he just didn't know what yet. With a slight chuckle, Hiruzen handed the large scroll of seals to one of the nearby ANBU, who vanished in an instant. He then reached out and ruffled Naruto's hair affectionately, causing the boy to look up at him in confusion. You've done well, Naruto. You fought with all your might to protect Iruka and thwart Mizuki. That was an impressive display, truly. Naruto blushed slightly at the praise but found himself preening under it. However, his moment of pride was short-lived when the Hokage's hand grew heavier, more insistent. But, Hiruzen added with a gleam in his eye, you and I are going to have a long talk, Naruto. A very long one. Naruto gulped audibly, the dread returning. His legs shook slightly as he followed the Hokage, surrounded by ANBU guards as they moved through the clearing. Hokage's office, morning. The Hokage's office was as grand and imposing as ever, the walls lined with historical documents and portraits of past Hokage. The sunlight filtered in through large windows, casting a warm glow on the room. But for Naruto, the atmosphere felt more suffocating than comforting. He was seated across from the Hokage at the large desk, fiddling with the hem of his sleeve, his eyes glued to the floor. Hiruzen watched the boy for a moment, the silence stretching on as he thoughtfully took off his hat. Finally, he leaned forward, his tone softer than before. I'm not truly upset with you, Naruto, Hiruzen began, his voice calm and understanding. From what you've told me, and based on what I know of the situation, you are not at fault here. Naruto looked up at the Hokage in surprise, his wide eye searching for any hint of anger or disappointment. But none came. The Hokage's gaze was kind, understanding, and full of wisdom. Really? Naruto asked, his voice almost hesitant. Indeed, Hiruzen nodded. You followed the instructions of a trusted mentor. Mizuki had helped guide your training for the past 5 years, so there was no reason for you to doubt him. You acted as any good shinobi would have in the field. Your judgment was sound. Naruto's shoulders visibly relaxed, the tension that had built up in his chest easing as the Hokage reassured him. He sat up straighter, his posture more confident now. However, there was still one question gnawing at him, the question that had plagued him since his confrontation with Mizuki. With a deep breath, he asked the one thing that had been haunting him all night. Was what Mizuki said really true? Do I have the Kyuubi inside me? Hiruzen's expression shifted then, his eyes hardening as he turned to look out the window. A deep regret filled his gaze as he slowly answered. As much as I wish it were not true, Mizuki's words were correct. 12 years ago, the Kyuubi no Kitsune attacked our village. The devastation it caused was unimaginable. We tried everything to stop it, but nothing worked. The only person capable of containing the Kyuubi was the 4th Hokage, your father, Minato Namikaze. Naruto's breath caught in his throat. The truth was out. For the first time, he was hearing the full story, his story. Hiruzen continued, his voice tinged with sorrow. The 4th Hokage, in his final act of sacrifice, sealed the Kyuubi inside a newborn. That newborn was you. Naruto's mind spun, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him. A terrible burden, placed on him by fate. But the Hokage wasn't finished. I want you to understand this, Naruto, Hiruzen said, leaning forward slightly. Though the Kyuubi is sealed inside you, you are not the demon. You are not evil. You are not what Mizuki called you. The seal your father placed on you is one of the strongest in existence. It is designed so that the Kyuubi cannot escape unless you will it. You are merely a vessel, a Jinwoo, a human sacrifice who holds the Kyuubi's power within, but not its will. Naruto's mind raced. He could barely process the magnitude of what Hiruzen was telling him. He was the Kyuubi's container, a walking time bomb. But, at the same time, he wasn't. His heart and soul were his own. He was just Naruto. After a few moments of silence, Naruto slowly nodded, digesting the information. His thoughts were a whirlwind, but something inside him settled. He wasn't the demon. He wasn't the Kyuubi. He was Naruto, just as Iruka had said. Finally, he spoke up, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within him. What happens now? Hiruzen gave a small, understanding smile. Now, Naruto, now you wait. Naruto blinked, confused. Wait? For what? Well, Hiruzen continued, you've received an informal field promotion from Iruka, but we still need to determine your official status among the genin. Your classmates will need to take a secondary test to prove themselves worthy of becoming genin. Once those tests are complete, we can figure out where you stand. Naruto furrowed his brow, still trying to wrap his head around it all. So, I'm not a genin yet. Correct, Hiruzen replied, but you are well on your way. Once the tests are complete, we'll assign you to a Jonin sensei who will guide you in your training. In the meantime, I'll make sure you have some hands-on experience with active teams, so you won't be left behind. Naruto nodded slowly, taking in the Hokage's words. He was part of the village's future now, a genin in the making. That thought filled him with pride, though it also made him anxious. He had a lot of work to do. So, I just wait until next week? Naruto asked. Yes, Hiruzen said, exhaling a puff of smoke from his pipe. Tomorrow, the Jonin will begin assigning their teams. I'll make sure you are included in one of their training exercises. After that, we'll see where you're needed. Naruto sighed in relief. That didn't sound too bad. He had a whole week to prepare. And who knew? Maybe, just maybe, he'd finally find a place where he belonged. As the Hokage finished his pipe, he looked up at Naruto with a soft smile. For now, I think you've earned some rest. Head home and get some sleep. Tomorrow, we'll begin the next phase of your journey. Naruto nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion hit him. It had been a long night, and he was ready to sleep. Thanks, Jiji, he said quietly, giving the Hokage a small, genuine smile. Hiruzen watched him leave, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. He turned to his desk, pulling out a piece of paper. There was something about Naruto's newfound power that concerned him. He needed to speak with Nara Shikaku, the village's Jonin commander. Minato, Hiruzen muttered to himself, a wistful smile on his face. I hope I'm doing the right thing. Morning in the village. Naruto found himself wandering the streets of Konoha the following morning, his body sore from lack of rest, but his heart lighter than it had been in days. The streets were still quiet, save for the distant sounds of bakers firing up their ovens and blacksmiths hammering away at their forges. The air was crisp, the sun rising slowly over the village. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't had much to eat since yesterday. But as he approached Ichiraku ramen, his mouth watered at the thought of the warm, salty broth. Sitting down at his usual spot, he waited eagerly as Tuka prepared his favorite meal. Hey, Naruto, Tuka greeted, grinning as he set a steaming bowl of ramen before him. You've got the look of someone who just got good news. Naruto smiled broadly, his eyes sparkling. Yeah, I guess you could say that. He slurped his noodles eagerly, savoring the rich, hearty flavor. Things are starting to look up for me. Tuka gave a knowing smile. Well, you deserve it, kid. Enjoy your meal, and take care of yourself. As Naruto finished his meal, he looked out across the village, feeling a sense of quiet pride. The past was behind him. Today, he was a genin, with everything ahead of him. Another 15 minutes of walking and eating, and Naruto finally made it back to his apartment. He was exhausted but satisfied, his body tired from the whirlwind of emotions and thoughts he'd experienced in the past 24 hours. Unlocking the door to his humble abode, he removed his sandals and stepped inside, the familiar smell of stale air and wood filling his senses. The place, though modest, was his, and in that sense, it felt comforting. His sanctuary, of sorts. Shutting the door behind him, he shuffled across the room with the same fatigued steps that had become all too familiar to him over the past few months. With each step, his mind still raced, his thoughts drawn back to the confrontation with Mizuki. It had been the first real test for him, and despite the odds, despite the lack of a solid teacher or mentor, he'd pulled through. He was more than just the boy everyone saw him as. He had power now, real power. Dropping his bag next to his single bed, he collapsed onto it with a long, drawn-out sigh, letting his body sink into the mattress. His muscles ached from the strain, but the satisfaction that followed his victory against Mizuki was far more significant. Tonight, he'd done it. He'd taken the first real steps toward mastering his newfound abilities. But even as he lay there, resting, his mind couldn't settle. No matter how much he wanted to relax, to ignore the responsibility, the weight of what he had unlocked gnawed at the back of his mind. The shadows had whispered to him before, and they would continue to do so. The power that had been awakened within him, the power of the Shadow King, was not a simple force to wield. He could feel it, the essence of something ancient, something primal, resonating in his very being. The shadows themselves seemed to react to him, to his moods, his thoughts, and to his newfound strength. They were there, with him, guiding him, teaching him, and sometimes even testing him. This was no ordinary ability. It was the legacy of a long-forgotten king, one who had ruled over darkness and commanded shadows as though they were his subjects. And now, that legacy had been passed on to him. Naruto closed his eyes, the exhaustion overwhelming him as the room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching and shifting in response to his presence. They whispered to him once more, as they had the night before. "Interesting, boy. Yes?" The voice was deep, resonant, almost like a distant echo, and yet it felt so immediate, so present in his mind. "Time will tell." The words came slowly, as if they were savoring each syllable. But then, as if the voice was retreating, there was a soft urging. "For now, sleep." Naruto, despite himself, let out another sigh. The shadows around him seemed to cradle him, to protect him, even as he drifted into a deeper slumber. His body sank further into the bed, the cool sheets wrapping around him like a cocoon. The darkness was comforting now, a welcome embrace after the intensity of the past few days. And as he fell into the arms of sleep, the shadows whispered around him, continuing their vigil. XXXX. The sky outside his window had shifted by the time Naruto awoke. The pale light of early morning had given way to the warm, fiery glow of dusk, the colors of the sky spilling over the village in shades of red, orange, and pink. The setting sun cast long shadows across his room, a reminder of the power he now commanded, power that was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. Naruto yawned, stretching his arms over his head as he blinked away the remnants of sleep. His body ached, his muscles still sore from the training, but there was something invigorating about it. Something that made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt before. The boy stood, stretching his back and groaning as he walked toward the bathroom to take care of business. His mind, however, was already working. Training was something he couldn't afford to waste time on anymore. The moment he had unlocked his ability, the very fabric of his being had changed. And now, he had to learn to control it. Every day was an opportunity to get stronger. To learn. After he'd freshened up, Naruto made his way to his kitchenette. He wasn't in the mood for anything fancy, so a quick ramen dinner would do the trick. As he set the water on the stove to boil, his thoughts turned once more to the training scroll he'd received from the baker. It had been an odd encounter, one that still lingered in his mind, but there was no denying its significance. The scroll contained valuable techniques, ones that would help him harness his abilities. Reaching into the shadows, Naruto retrieved the scroll. It had been tucked safely within the depths of his darkness, a reminder that the power he wielded was far more than simple chakra. This was something else, something older, something that had long been waiting for him. His fingers flipped through the pages of the scroll as he scanned the instructions for the exercise. Use chakra to create a pillar of sand with your hand, he murmured, scratching his eye patch idly as he read. Make the pillar thinner to up the difficulty. Once it gets to a 100 Ryo coins width at standing shoulder height, the technique is mastered? Huh. That sounds kind of hard, actually. He shrugged, tossing the ramen into the boiling water. Nothing to it but to do it, he muttered, trying to convince himself as he prepared the seasoning. As the ramen cooked, Naruto's thoughts turned back to the technique. A pillar of sand. It seemed simple enough, but he knew from experience that the simplest techniques could be the most difficult to master. And this wasn't just about chakra control. No, there was something deeper, something more complex involved. When the ramen was ready, Naruto hungrily devoured it, the warm noodles filling his stomach as he prepared himself mentally for the training ahead. He wasn't sure how long it would take him to master this, but he was ready to put in the effort. His mind shifted back to the reflection in the full-length mirror in the corner of the room. He hadn't bothered to look at himself much before. His appearance was hardly impressive, scrawny, one-eyed, with his usual unruly blonde hair. But as he stood there, staring at his reflection, something inside him clicked. He removed his eye patch and looked at his eye closely. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. It wasn't a normal eye. There was no iris, no clear definition of shape. Instead, it looked like a black void with a faintly glowing blue iris and a black slit pupil. Smoke-like shadows trailed from the edges of the eye, twisting and writhing in the air around him. Naruto focused a bit of chakra into the eye, his hand hovering over it. The glow intensified, and the shadows seemed to move in response to his will. Cool. He muttered, watching the eerie glow get brighter, the shadows growing more pronounced as they coiled around him like living tendrils. The power he felt was intoxicating, filling him with a strange sense of purpose. He was not the same boy he had been a week ago. Training time, he murmured to himself as he stepped toward his dresser. He grabbed his usual training clothes, black pants, a burnt orange jacket, and a black t-shirt underneath. He grinned at his reflection. Looking good, he said to his reflection with a smug grin, then struck a few poses, making sure to accentuate the glowing power in his eye. He couldn't help it. The power was there. It was his now, and he would use it. But even as he admired his reflection, a voice came from behind him. The shadows. They weren't pleased with his moment of vanity. Brat. Quit playing with yourself. Naruto stuck his tongue out childishly at the vague shapes that shifted behind him. Yeah, whatever. You wish you looked this good, he muttered before grabbing his ninja pouch and tossing it into his shadow. With a final glance at his reflection, Naruto placed his headband onto his bicep instead of his forehead. A small rebellion, a statement that he was not the typical shinobi. Then, with a confident grin, he set out the window to begin his training. XXXX. Waterfall Abyss. Hours later, Naruto arrived at his training spot, the Waterfall Abyss, a secluded area far from the village where he could train undisturbed. The water rushing over the rocks created a constant, soothing sound, but Naruto's focus was elsewhere. He spread the scroll out before him, rereading the instructions carefully. He knelt by the edge of the river and placed his hand against the soft sand. Focusing his chakra, He slowly began to lift his hand, attempting to form a mound of sand, just like the scroll instructed. At first, nothing happened, but after a moment of concentrating, the sand began to shift, lifting into a small mound. Naruto grinned, his confidence building, but the joy was short-lived. He lost focus, and with a burst of chakra, the sand exploded outward in all directions, a cloud of dust and dirt coating him from head to toe. Spitting sand out of his mouth, Naruto glared at the shadows, which, despite their ghostly nature, seemed to chuckle at his frustration. Failure, again. Naruto growled, wiping sand from his face as he stood up. Shut up, he snapped, glaring into the growing shadows around him. I'm not giving up. You don't know me. He inhaled deeply, calming his thoughts. This time, he focused, channeling all of his chakra into the task. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hand again. The sand began to shift, rising slightly, its edges crisping into a fine pillar. It was slow, almost agonizingly so, but Naruto could feel the progress, feel the connection between his chakra and the shadow within him. He wasn't sure how long he trained, but by the time the sun had fully dipped below the horizon, a pillar of sand stood before him, just over shoulder height. He stared at it, breathless, as the glow of the shadows enveloped him in pride. Well done, boy. The following day, Uzumaki Naruto woke up with the first rays of sunlight peeking through his window. The previous night had been a long one, but he had managed to reach a significant milestone in his training. He had exhausted himself with his work, focusing on honing his abilities until he was confident that he had made enough progress to take a break. Despite the late night, the young shinobi was already up, energized, and ready to face the challenges of the day. After a hearty breakfast of rice, eggs, and miso soup, Naruto set to work preparing himself for the day's tasks. The early morning air felt refreshing as he dressed in clean clothes, his usual orange jumpsuit that had become synonymous with his identity in the village. His headband, proudly tied to his arm, gleamed in the light. As part of his new responsibilities as a freshly minted genin, he had an appointment at the Hokage's office. There, he would have his photo taken for his official shinobi registration, a necessary step for any shinobi in the village. He had been told that he was to meet the photographer and provide the picture needed for his file. Arriving at the Hokage's tower, Naruto entered the building and walked straight to the lobby. The Hokage's assistant, a young Chunin, greeted him and quickly went about notifying the Hokage of his arrival. Naruto waited for a few moments, pacing restlessly in the lobby as he thought about his next steps and what awaited him in the future. Before long, he was given the signal to enter. Waving at the assistant, Naruto made his way into the Hokage's office. The room was quiet, with only the Hokage himself inside. The aging Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, sat at his desk, a look of amusement in his eyes when he noticed the young boy's arrival. Naruto walked up confidently and handed him the registration form, which included the photo taken by the photographer earlier. As Hiruzen examined the picture, he couldn't help but smile. The photograph showed Naruto with his arms crossed, a serious expression on his face, and his signature eye patch in place. It was a surprisingly mature image, one that exuded a sense of purpose and determination. Hiruzen had half expected Naruto to try and make a spectacle of himself, but this photograph was surprisingly fitting for a shinobi. Nice picture, Naruto-kun, the Hokage said with a chuckle. This will be the first thing any client sees when missions are being assigned to you. It's a good idea to start with a serious first impression. Civilians like the shinobi mystique when they choose their guards. Naruto grinned, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. I thought about doing a bunch of different poses, but this one seemed to work best. Kinda like something you'd see in an action movie, right? I've seen some jonin around the village use that kind of serious pose when they're picking up clients, so I figured it'd be a good idea. Hiruzen nodded in understanding. There was nothing wrong with trying to emulate the elite of the village, After all. Well, that's fine. But there are other things I wanted to talk to you about, Naruto-kun. Specifically, your new abilities that you gained from the scroll. Naruto straightened up, a serious look taking over his features as he remembered the strange event that had changed his life. The shadow contract, right? He asked. The Hokage nodded. Yes, that's the one. I understand the Shadow King granted you a contract. Tell me more about it. What have you learned so far? Naruto spoke with a sense of pride as he explained the mechanics of the shadow-based jutsu he had been practicing. The Shadow King gave me the contract. It works by me sacrificing chakra to my shadow eye to summon shadows and control them. I've been working hard to figure out all the ins and outs, but it's going well. Hirazen's eyes sparkled with curiosity. I see, quite an interesting ability you have there, Naruto-kun. I'm sure it will take you far when you fully master it. He paused, then continued. I spoke with Shikaku, the head of the Nara clan. His clan is well known for their expertise in shadow techniques. From what you've told me, I understand that you don't use hand signs in your jutsu, correct? Naruto nodded. That's right, no hand signs. Just my chakra and my shadow. The Hokage smiled. In that case, the Nara clan won't be able to teach you their specific clan techniques, but they are willing to help you understand more about shadow manipulation. Next week, you should go to the Nara compound for some training with them. They'll assist you the best they can. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise, then he grinned. Thanks, Jiji. I've heard a little about their shadow techniques from Shikamaru, and if they can help me out with my abilities, I'll be even stronger. The Hokage returned the boy's grin with a grandfatherly smile. He reached into his desk and pulled out a small scroll, handing it to Naruto. Here's a general workout routine. Typically, new genin receive this on their team assignment, but since you have some extra time, I thought you could use it to get ready for next week. Naruto looked at the scroll eagerly. It contained instructions for exercises and techniques that would help him build strength and improve his physical stamina. Thanks, Jiji. I'll definitely get through this. Chuyunin, here I come. The Hokage chuckled softly, shaking his head fondly. That's the spirit, Naruto-kun. Keep working hard, and you'll go far. Naruto gave him a confident salute before standing up. Got it, Jiji. I'll see you later. Good luck, Naruto-kun, the Hokage said, watching the boy leave the office. As Naruto walked out of the Hokage's tower, he felt a sense of excitement building up within him. The whole day had been a blur, and it was already approaching lunchtime. He could see groups of fellow genin walking around the village, some heading towards the academy, others talking in small groups. The teens must have been assigned earlier in the day, and the genin were now heading off for their lunch breaks. Naruto didn't have a team yet, but he knew that his turn would come soon enough. For now, his priority was to get some food and then train. He had a lot of work to do, after all. His mind was already set on the next task at hand. Before long, Naruto found himself at his favorite ramen shop. Yo, can I get a large miso ramen? He called out, hopping onto a stool at the counter. The shop owner, a middle-aged man with gray hair and squinted eyes, chuckled warmly. You got it, Naruto-kun. Ayam, grab the kid a drink. He called to the back of the shop. Ayam, the shop owner's daughter, appeared soon after, a bright smile on her face as she set a cup of tea in front of Naruto. How's it going, Naruto-kun? It's been a while. Naruto grinned, lifting the cup to his lips. Well, I've been pretty busy, but I passed. I'm officially a genin now. He proudly thumped his headband, now tied to his bicep, to emphasize his achievement. Ayam's eyes widened in surprise, and she clapped her hands together. Congratulations, Naruto-kun, she exclaimed, before quickly running around the counter to hug him. "You did it? You hear that, Dad? I told you he'd pass." Her father appeared soon after, holding a steaming bowl of ramen. "Would you look at that? I knew you could do it, Naruto," he said, placing the bowl in front of the boy. "How about we give the newest shinobi a few bowls on the house to celebrate?" Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? Awesome. How about a beef and shrimp next?" he called out eagerly, his stomach growling at the prospect of more food. "You got it," the ramen shop owner replied, chuckling at the boy's enthusiasm. XXXX. The rest of Naruto's week followed a similar routine. He spent each day training his body, using the workout scroll the Hokage had given him. In the evenings, he focused on chakra control and refining his sand pillar techniques. The night was reserved for his shadow training. With every passing day, he felt himself getting stronger, more capable, and more connected to the powers granted to him by the Shadow King. By the time Saturday night rolled around, Naruto was fully immersed in his shadow-based abilities. It was during one of his late-night training sessions that an unexpected visitor arrived. The familiar voice, soft and resonant, echoed through the clearing. "Hard at work, young shade?" Naruto spun around, startled but quickly calming himself as he recognized the form of the Shadow King, standing at the edge of the clearing, shrouded in darkness. The king's voice always carried a sense of mystery and authority that both unsettled and intrigued Naruto. "Ah, you scared me again. You're way too sneaky, you know that," Naruto said with a grin as he approached the king. "One day, you too will move with the stealth of a shadow." The Shadow King studied Naruto with approval, then spoke again. "I've come to check on your progress. I hear your time has been eventful." Naruto nodded, his face serious. "I've been training hard, and things have been going well. I feel like I'm getting better every day. But I need more. I want to become even stronger." "What's next?" The Shadow King smiled. "You have much potential, Naruto Uzumaki. But to truly master your abilities, you must first learn to control the shadows within yourself. Your powers come from your inner darkness, your rage, your grief. Do not shy away from these emotions. Embrace them, and you will find yourself becoming an unstoppable force." Naruto's heart beat faster at the king's words. He felt a surge of excitement. "I can do that," he said with a nod, his resolve stronger than ever. "I'll master the shadows. I'll show everyone that I'm more than just the Hokage surprise. I'm gonna be the greatest shinobi the world has ever seen." With those words, Naruto's path became even clearer, and the darkness of his journey awaited him. The Hokage's tower was a familiar sight for Naruto, yet today, it seemed different. It felt heavier, as though something significant was about to unfold. He stood in the mission dispatch room, leaning against the counter, hands resting on the cold surface, a notebook in one hand. His heart raced with excitement. Today marked the day he would finally be attached to a shinobi team, though he knew that for the most part, the genin teams were still in flux. He'd heard that only 3 teams had passed the secondary test, while the others would either drop out or retake the test in 6 months. It didn't bother him too much, though. Naruto was only interested in growing stronger and working with more experienced shinobi. He was ready to push beyond the bounds of the academy. The last week of training had been grueling but productive. Naruto had delved deeper into his shadow-based abilities, each new discovery adding to his growing understanding of his powers. His body was still adjusting to the immense power that flowed through him, especially when his emotions were heightened. He ran a pencil down the page of his notebook, reviewing his findings. Number 1. Shadow extraction isn't 100% guaranteed to work, and there's a limit on how many attempts can be made on a single corpse, he murmured under his breath as he thought back to the large bear he had encountered a few days ago. It had been left by its killers, most likely as bait for scavengers. Naruto had tried to use his shadow extraction technique, but the results were less than he expected. By the time he'd found the bear, the shadow markers he'd left had almost completely faded, and no amount of chakra would restore them. It had taken 3 attempts before the dark mist had evaporated. It seemed like time had an effect on the power, and the technique was limited by both distance and time. Naruto's mind raced as he considered the next step. Maybe I have to deal the final blow myself to ensure the shadow doesn't fade away. He added that to his notes, planning to investigate further. He'd need to go hunting soon to test it out. Number 2. Regeneration of shadow beasts needs to be carefully managed, he continued. His recent fight against Mizuki had provided an important insight. Whenever one of his shadow beasts was destroyed, he instinctively channeled his chakra through his eye to repair it. However, Naruto had learned the hard way that running low on chakra in the middle of a fight could lead to trouble. I need more control over my chakra, he thought. The chakra drained by his shadow techniques didn't seem to replenish itself like normal chakra, meaning he couldn't rely on his standard reserves for shadow-based jutsu. It was clear that he needed to further develop his chakra training, not just for sustaining his jutsu, but also to avoid exhausting himself in the middle of missions. At the same time, he had no intention of giving up on learning more shinobi techniques. He couldn't afford to be limited to just one ability, not when the world was so vast and dangerous. Naruto's thoughts shifted to the next note. Number 3. Shadow beasts are more versatile than I realized, he murmured, a smile tugging at his lips. The discovery of his beast's ability to move away from him, to operate independently, and even to hide in other shadows was a game changer. He could control them silently, with only a thought connecting him to them, like an unspoken command that bridged the gap between them. He had tested their ability to leap out from the shadow of a kunao, sending the beast charging at a straw dummy with terrifying force. The idea of unleashing one of his shadow beasts in the middle of battle, potentially out of a small weapon like that, sent a thrill down his spine. The possibilities were endless. Maybe I can use my shadow beasts for more than just fighting, Naruto thought. I could use them for stealth missions, reconnaissance. There's so much more to this. His excitement grew, and he couldn't help but chuckle to himself, catching the attention of the Hokage and Iruka, who exchanged confused looks as they sorted through the paperwork on the desk behind him. He continued flipping through his notes, lost in his thoughts. He had been working on refining his chakra control, especially after his accidental discovery with the stones at the shore. What had started as a simple experiment to move larger rocks had turned into an intriguing study in chakra's adhesive properties. The realization that he could climb using just his chakra without needing any handholds was fascinating. He wondered if he could extend that ability to his feet, potentially allowing him to run up walls like a spider or even move across water without sinking. That could be awesome, he thought, his mind already racing with new ways to push his limits. The sound of the large doors to the mission dispatch center opening broke him from his reverie. A female jonin entered first, catching Naruto's attention immediately. She was tall, with unruly black hair that framed her face and crimson eyes that gleamed with authority. Her outfit was striking, oversized bandages wrapped around her body, a single red sleeve, and a dark, thorn-like design that added an edge to her appearance. Behind her were 3 familiar faces. First was Shino, his Abarame clan sunglasses still perched over his eyes, his face impassive as usual. His long coat and the pale green of his outfit didn't offer much indication of his mood, but Naruto could tell the boy had been doing his best to improve. Next was Hinata, the shy Hyuga heiress, dressed in a beige jacket with fur trim. Her pale lavender eyes flicked nervously around the room before landing on Naruto. The moment their eyes met, she flushed a deep red, quickly looking away. Naruto smirked, amused by her reaction. Her embarrassment never failed to make him smile. The last member of the team was Shikamaru. As usual, he wore the slouching posture of someone who could care less about anything, his face betraying the trademark laziness he was known for. His black hair spiked out, but Naruto knew well enough that the boy's relaxed demeanor could quickly shift to sharp focus when the situation called for it. Naruto's gaze lingered on each of his old classmates. Shikamaru's boredom, Hinata's shyness, and Shino's stoic silence had all been familiar to him during their time together. But now, there was something different about them. Shikamaru looked at him with narrowed eyes, as though sensing something odd in the air. The weight in Naruto's chest had grown heavier over the past few weeks, a subtle shift in his presence that even the Nara could pick up on. "Yo," Naruto said, waving to the trio. "How've you guys been?" Shikamaru grunted in response. "Troublesome as always," he muttered, though a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Shino gave a terse nod. "I've been well." "It's good to see you again," Naruto said. Hinata's voice was quieter than usual. Hello, Naruto-kun," she said shyly, her face flushing again as she spoke. Naruto grinned, his hands in his pockets. "Not much has changed, huh? Kurane-sensei working you guys to the bone already?" He elbowed Shikamaru lightly, who let out a deep sigh. "Slave-driving woman." Shikamaru muttered under his breath, and Naruto chuckled. Hinata smiled at the banter, though she didn't join in. Shino's response was more analytical. "Kurane-sensei has been working us harder, especially after the passing of her test on Tuesday," he remarked. Without effort, Shikamaru would not train himself. Naruto laughed at that, shaking his head. "Yeah, sounds about right." Before any more exchanges could be made, Kurane spoke up. "All right, you four, we have training ground 11 reserved for the next 35 days, she said, her tone sharp and professional. "We'll meet there daily for training. Naruto, you're with us now, so we'll get started soon." Naruto nodded, excited for the training to come. "Sounds good to me." Kurane smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. "For now, we'll grab a quick meal, and then we'll head to the training ground." As they all left the Hokage's tower, Naruto felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey was just beginning, and with his new team by his side, he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Team 8 had barely left the tower before heading to a small cafe not far from Hokage's tower. The street was bustling with activity as they made their way through the crowded village. Once they found a table, everyone settled down quickly. Shikamaru and Shino sat on one side, with Hinata and Kurane on the other. Naruto took the spot at the end of the table. After everyone had placed their orders, the group fell into a comfortable silence, the calm before the storm of conversation that was about to follow. "Let's introduce ourselves again so Naruto-san can get a little refresher on everyone," Kurane suggested, her smile warm as she glanced at Naruto. The others nodded in agreement, eager to make the introduction smoother for their new teammate. Kurane spoke first, her voice steady and confident. "I'll go first. My name is Yoi Kurane. I just recently became a jonin, specializing in genjutsu. I enjoy coming up with new genjutsu and spending time with my friends. I dislike those who believe that women can't be as strong as men or those who look down on genjutsu as a lesser skill. My dream for the future is to see all of you become chunin, though I know you'll surpass that." Kurane finished her introduction with a smile and a glance at Shikamaru, who was already slouching in his seat, looking like he was ready to fall asleep. Shikamaru sighed dramatically, his shoulders drooping as though the weight of the world was on him. "Guess I'll get this troublesome stuff over with." His words were met with eye rolls from the others, who were used to his lazy demeanor. "My name is Nara Shikamaru," he muttered, adjusting his position in his chair. "I like cloud watching, naps, and playing shogi. I dislike loud people and anyone who tries to force hard work onto me." He gave Kurane a pointed look at the mention of hard work, before continuing in an even quieter tone, "Troublesome. My dream for the future," Shikamaru said with a yawn. "I want to become chunin, find a woman who's neither ugly nor pretty, and have 2 kids, 1 boy," One girl. Then I'll retire and live the rest of my days playing shogi. He shrugged as if he had just described the most ideal future. Naruto shook his head in amusement. It was so typical of Shikamaru to have such an unambitious goal, but it somehow fit him perfectly. Next, it was Hineda's turn. Her voice was soft, barely rising above the background noise of the cafe. "Ano, my name is Hyaga Hineda," she began, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I like pressing flowers." Her voice wavered slightly as she continued. "I don't like bullies, or people who hurt others for no reason. My hope is to one day lead the Hyaga clan and change the traditions that we have now." For a moment, her usual quiet demeanor shifted, and there was a faint fire in her eyes. It wasn't much, but Naruto noticed it. Hineda wasn't as timid and weak as she sometimes seemed. There was more strength in her than people realized. "I always thought she was just shy, but she's got a real determination behind all that softness," Naruto thought to himself. "I wonder what she'll do with it." Shino went next, his usual stoic expression never faltering as he spoke. "I believe it's my turn now. My name is Abarame Shino. I enjoy learning about insects and finding new species to add to my collection. I dislike people who kill insects for no reason and those who belittle others. My ambition is to one day become the head of the Abarame clan and create stronger chukar beetles to benefit Konoha." Naruto blinked in surprise. He'd never heard Shino speak so much at once. Normally, Shino was reserved and quiet, but this was different. Shino's dedication to his clan was something that was evident in his words, and Naruto couldn't help but admire it. Finally, it was Naruto's turn. He cleared his throat, but the words came easily. "All right, my name is Uzumaki Naruto. I like my precious people, training, and ramen miso pork flavored from Ichiraku is my favorite. I don't like people who hurt others just because they think they're stronger, or anyone who thinks they can hurt my precious people and get away with it." He paused for a moment, his expression serious as he finished. "My dream is to one day be Hokage, but for now, my goal is to get stronger and make that guy proud." His statement left the others curious but none more than Kurenai, who tilted her head. "That guy?" she asked, but before Naruto could answer, their food arrived, and the conversation was put on hold as they dug into their meals, distracted by their growling stomachs. XXXX. After finishing their meal and paying for the bill, Team 8 headed to the training grounds. The area was spacious, with a small hill at the back, topped with an oak tree. Around the clearing were a handful of wooden posts set in an irregular semicircle, perfect for training. It was a quiet place, far from the hustle of the village, and Naruto found it peaceful, a welcome change from the chaos of his usual life. Kurenai had them begin with warm-up exercises and stretches. Naruto was doing his stretches properly, much to Kurenai's surprise. She couldn't help but smile as she approached him, impressed with how well he was keeping up. "Good to see you've maintained good health," Naruto said. "Did someone give you the standard exercises?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Naruto stood up and gave her a thumbs up. "Yeah, Hokage Chichi gave me a scroll for this stuff last week. I was already doing most of the workout anyways, but it's nice to have some extra training to add to my routine." Kurenai nodded approvingly. "Well done. That's one less thing I need to go over then. Once everyone's warmed up, we'll go through a few teamwork exercises and maybe some tracking training." Naruto gave her another thumbs up and went back to his stretches. 45 minutes later, everyone was suitably warmed up and ready to begin. The first exercise Kurenai introduced was a simple one. They would throw a ball around without speaking, communicating only with their body language and hand signals. The objective was to keep the ball moving while learning to understand each other's movements without relying on words, a critical skill for ninjas working in teams. It was also a good exercise for improving their hand-eye coordination. The 4 genin spread out around the training posts, shifting positions as they threw the ball to one another. Kurenai set the speed for the exercise, and the first round began. Shino was the first to throw, sending the ball behind him towards Shikamaru with nothing more than a glance. Without missing a beat, Shikamaru caught it, spun, and threw it underhand toward Naruto. The blonde ninja caught it easily, throwing it back to Hinata with a quick, controlled underhand toss. Hinata, with surprising agility, caught it and sent it back to Shino over the heads of the other two. Kurenai watched the first round closely, nodding at the smooth coordination. "Good job, everyone," she called out. "Switch positions and increase the speed with each round. Let's keep this going." And so, the game continued. The speed picked up with every round, and the group grew more coordinated. The rules were simple: as long as the ball didn't hit the ground, it was still in play. The genin caught on quickly, bouncing the ball off the training posts and sending it toward their teammates, pushing the pace of the exercise. 3 rounds passed without incident, but on the 4th round, Naruto threw the ball too hard. It bounced off a post and smacked Shikamaru square on the head, leaving a red mark. "Oops, sorry about that, Shikamaru," Naruto called out with an apologetic grin, trying hard not to laugh. Shikamaru rubbed his head, grumbling under his breath, "Troublesome blonde." But despite the grumbling, he grabbed the ball and tossed it back into play. As the rounds continued, the game evolved from simple passing to something more akin to a high-speed version of dodgeball, with players dodging and weaving around the posts, trying to avoid the ball while keeping it in the air. The exercise was fast and frantic, but by the end of it, the 4 genin had improved significantly in their coordination, their ability to communicate without speaking, and their teamwork. It was a successful training session, and Kurenai gave them a nod of approval. "Well done, everyone. I'm impressed. We'll add in some more complex exercises next time, but for today, you've all made great progress." The genin smiled at the praise, each of them feeling a little stronger and a little more connected as a team. Despite the grueling work, Naruto couldn't help but feel excited about the days ahead. This was just the beginning of their journey together. The following day came too soon for Naruto as he reluctantly rose from his bed and prepared for his meeting with the Nara clan. The previous week had been a blur of intense training with Team 8 under Kurenai's guidance, but Naruto had taken to his new training regimen like a fish to water. Even so, his body was aching from the constant strain, especially the chakra-less exercises that Kurenai insisted they do to improve their physical abilities. While the others seemed to have their strengths and weaknesses, Naruto couldn't help but feel that his own abilities were a little more complicated. The shadows had shown him a new path, one that didn't require chakra at all, and now he was determined to push those limits as far as they could go. As he dressed and prepared for the day ahead, he found himself reflecting on the week's training. His teammates, though occasionally grumbling about the intensity of the exercises, had been showing significant improvement. Shikamaru, ever the strategist, had learned to push through his physical limits when necessary, realizing that his sharp mind wasn't enough if his body couldn't keep up. Shino had proven his mental fortitude, but his physical endurance needed work, something Naruto could empathize with. As for Hinata, well, her reserved nature still held her back at times, but her determination was starting to shine through, and Naruto could see her slowly finding her own strength in their teamwork. It was the moments in between the official training sessions that had been most revealing, especially during their evening talks at the dango shop or casual chats on the way to the training ground. There was camaraderie developing, albeit slowly. Even Kurenai, as strict as she was, began to show the softer side of her leadership. It was clear to Naruto that this team had potential. He finished his breakfast, quickly stowing away his things and grabbing his gear before heading out. His goal for the day wasn't just to train, but to learn something more about his power, about the shadows that had become a part of him. When Naruto arrived at the Nara clan compound, the shadows of the early morning cast long, eerie shapes across the stone pathways, but he paid them no mind. After all, he had spent most of the past week living in shadows that whispered to him, shadows that had guided his training, shadows that had made him feel more connected to his surroundings than ever before. Now he was eager to learn from the masters of those very shadows. As he walked through the large, spacious grounds of the Nara clan, he admired the tranquility of it all. The Nara were known for their genius intellects, their mastery of shadows, and their calm, almost serene lifestyle. He was here to gain insight into that mastery. He knocked on the door to the Nara clan's main house. It was opened by a tall, imposing figure, Nara Shikamaru's father. The older Nara gave him a curt nod. "Ah, Uzumaki Naruto. You're early. Shikamaru will be joining us shortly. Come on in," Shikako said, stepping aside to let him in. Naruto gave a nod in return, walking into the house. He was immediately struck by how different the interior was from most of the homes in Konoha. It was minimalistic, with dark wood floors and low, traditional furniture. There was a sense of quiet here, almost as if the house itself was in tune with the shadows that surrounded it. Shikako led him to a large room at the back of the house, where a small study table was set up, covered in papers and scrolls. At one end of the room, the window opened up into a private garden. The air felt thick with anticipation, and Naruto couldn't help but feel the weight of the shadows outside. They were watching him, waiting. "We're going to focus on your control of shadows," Shikako began as he motioned for Naruto to sit. "You already have an instinctual grasp on the shadows themselves, but you'll need to understand the finer details. The Nara clan specializes in this technique, and I'll be your guide today." Naruto nodded, taking a seat at the table. He was eager to learn, and he knew that understanding the shadows better would only give him an edge in battle. But more than that, it would allow him to use his abilities more creatively. He had learned a few tricks already on his own, but he suspected that the Nara clan could teach him something far beyond his current capabilities. Shikako sat across from him, his face expressionless, though there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "First things first," he said, unrolling his scroll, "we need to start with the basics. You've been using your shadows instinctively, but you'll need to understand a fundamental concept of shadow manipulation. The key is intent. The shadows are a tool, but they require your focus and willpower to move and form." Naruto nodded. He understood that part from his own experience. The shadows, when he focused on them, would respond to his will. But it was more than just controlling them, it was about shaping them to his desires. He'd already figured out how to use them for offense and defense, but could he use them in new ways? Shikako continued, "The Nara clan uses their shadows for a variety of purposes, binding, transporting, even creating traps. But the most important skill you can master is subtlety. Shadows are not just weapons, they are extensions of your will. They should blend seamlessly into the environment, undetectable and unexpected." Naruto was silent for a moment, considering the older man's words. Subtlety. That was something he hadn't really thought about before. His shadows were often used for brute force grabbing, trapping, attacking. But blending in? He'd have to rethink his approach. "I want you to focus on your shadow, Naruto," Shikako said, snapping Naruto out of his thoughts. "Close your eyes and clear your mind. Reach out with your senses. Let the shadows speak to you." Naruto did as instructed, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. At first, there was nothing. Then, as he relaxed, he began to feel a subtle shift in the air around him, a change in the way the light hit the walls. His shadows seemed to respond to him, as if they were aware of his presence. They moved in the periphery of his mind, whispering to him like a soft murmur. The sensation was strange, almost overwhelming. It was as though the shadows had their own consciousness, their own desires, and he was merely a conduit for their will. He reached out with his senses, trying to feel them more fully. Slowly, he began to understand. The shadows didn't just respond to his thoughts, they responded to his feelings, his intent. Now, Shikako said, his voice breaking the silence, I want you to move your shadow without moving your body. Just, guided with your mind. Naruto focused, feeling his shadow stretch out from beneath him. It was slow at first, hesitant, but then it picked up speed as he gained more control over it. It snaked across the floor, moving in a wave-like motion, extending and retracting as if it had a mind of its own. Naruto's heart raced as the shadow began to move more fluidly, no longer just a simple extension of his body. Good, Shikako said, watching him carefully. Now, try to manipulate the shape. Can you make it take form? Think about something you want it to become. Naruto furrowed his brow, focusing all of his attention on the shadow in front of him. He could feel it, he could control it, but shaping it? That was a different challenge. Slowly, the shadow began to twist, forming into something unfamiliar, a column of darkness that rose from the floor like a pillar. It was shaky at first, wobbly even, but as Naruto focused, the shadow stabilized. He grinned as he realized he could shape it, bend it to his will. It wasn't much yet, but it was a start. Shikako observed quietly, nodding in approval. Not bad for your first attempt. Keep practicing. The more you train with your shadow, the more you will understand it. You'll find that it becomes an extension of yourself. Naruto continued to practice for hours, slowly refining his control over the shadow. Each time he moved it, shaped it, or changed its form, he could feel himself growing stronger. The shadows were no longer just a tool to be used, they were a part of him, an extension of his power. As the day wore on, Naruto realized that he had learned more in these few hours than he had in the past week of training. The Nara clan's expertise in shadow manipulation had unlocked a whole new set of possibilities for him, and he was eager to continue his training. By the time Shikamaru arrived, he was exhausted but satisfied with his progress. The Nara clan's techniques had opened his mind to new ways of using his shadow, and he was already thinking of ways to incorporate them into his own style. Looks like you've made some progress, Shikamaru said, smirking at his friend. Naruto simply grinned back, wiping sweat from his brow. You could say that. I've got a lot more to learn, though. Shikako gave them both a nod of approval. That's the right attitude. Keep training, and we'll see how much you can grow. As Naruto left the Nara compound later that day, he felt more connected to his shadow powers than ever before. His training had only just begun, but already he could sense that the path ahead of him was one of endless possibilities. The morning sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Naruto stirred from his slumber. His body stretched with a deep, drawn-out yawn, his eyelids fluttering open to reveal the faint light creeping in through the window. Smacking his lips and rubbing the remnants of sleep from his eyes, Naruto groggily dragged himself out of bed. Another day, another opportunity to train and perhaps finally get some answers about his purpose and place in the world. The first order of business was a quick bathroom break, followed by a much-needed shower. Standing under the stream of hot water, Naruto let the warm sensation calm his mind, wiping away the fatigue that clung to him. As the water ran down, he could almost feel the tension in his muscles ease, his body coming alive. He wasn't just any regular ninja anymore, his path had changed, and he was starting to feel it deep in his bones. After getting dressed in his standard training outfit, a simple yet practical ensemble of black pants, a tight-fitting long-sleeve shirt, and a dark jacket, Naruto set to work on making breakfast. He didn't need anything extravagant. A quick mix of last night's leftover rice and miso soup, some fried eggs for a protein boost, and he was good to go. As he ate, he summoned his shadow beasts, small black tendrils of darkness that emerged from the ground, to clean up the mess for him. He didn't need to waste time on things that didn't matter right now. Once his teeth were brushed and the last of his gear was strapped into place, Naruto took a deep breath and stood, surveying his small apartment. He felt alone. But he wasn't going to let that bother him. Not today. He was heading out to train with the Nara clan, and he was looking forward to it. All right, let's get moving, he murmured to himself, sending his shadow beasts back into his own shadow and stepping out the door. The air outside was cool but pleasant. It was still early, barely past 8, and the streets were relatively empty, save for the occasional figure heading to their own destinations. As he made his way towards the eastern side of the village, where the Nara clan district was located, Naruto let his mind wander. The Nara district was a far cry from the chaotic, bustling parts of Konoha that Naruto had grown accustomed to. It was quiet, peaceful. And to Naruto, that meant one thing: training. He wasn't particularly fond of the silent lifestyle that the Nara clan seemed to embrace, but he knew there was value in their techniques, value he could use. Leaping from rooftop to rooftop, Naruto felt the familiar thrill of movement surge through him. His heart beat a little faster with the exertion, and the rush of the wind in his face felt invigorating. It took about 15 minutes to reach the compound, the time slipping by quickly. The Nara clan's district came into view, a large area with simple stone walls marking the borders, their emblem the wavy lines in a circle etched into various stones and pillars. Several houses were scattered throughout, each one modest and blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. The Nara clan, as always, kept their homes sparse but functional. The houses were beige with dark brown trim, and they were clearly built to integrate with the environment. There were hills scattered throughout, and Naruto could make out the shapes of herds of deer grazing in the distance. The Nara clan had always kept their deer herds for medicinal purposes, and Naruto had heard that the meat was prized in certain medicinal brews. Despite the early hour, several Nara clan members were already up and about, some patrolling the perimeter while others made their way to work. They all had the same messy black hair, tied in the familiar ponytail that stuck out like a pineapple on their heads. Seeing them made Naruto chuckle quietly. Must be a clan tradition or something, he muttered, passing by a group of 3 men, all of whom looked nearly identical except for subtle differences in their posture and expressions. Guess individuality's too troublesome, huh? Naruto snickered to himself, making light of the fact that the entire clan seemed to have the same lazy demeanor. It was something he'd noticed about Shikamaru, too, always the same uninterested attitude. It was almost like they were all cut from the same cloth. As he neared the clan head's house, the feeling of nervousness hit him. The Nara clan wasn't the same as the other clans in Konoha, but that didn't mean he was automatically welcome. Most of the villagers treated him with either fear or apathy, and he was never quite sure which one hurt more. The thought of being ignored by people he was trying to bond with stung like 1,000 needles. Hopefully, Shikamaru's parents weren't the same. Naruto reached the door and knocked firmly. The sound echoed briefly before fading away into the quiet air. A moment later, faint footsteps could be heard inside. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with long brown hair tied back in a low ponytail. She wore a pink blouse and a dark skirt under a white apron. She looked every bit the perfect image of a housewife. "Yes?" she asked, her tone curious but not unfriendly. Naruto bowed slightly in greeting. "Uzumaki Naruto. I'm here for the training the Hokage arranged." The woman's eyes widened slightly as she took a better look at him. Recognition seemed to hit her, and she nodded with a smile. "Oh. You're here already? We weren't sure when you'd arrive." Stepping aside, she motioned for him to enter. "Come on in." "Thanks," Naruto said, stepping over the threshold and removing his sandals as instructed. "I'm Nara Yoshino, Shikamaru's mom. Shikako and Shikamaru are out on the patio playing shogi. Come on, I'll take you to them." Naruto nodded politely as they walked through the house. The entryway led into a large sitting room, and beyond that, he could see a hallway that led to the kitchen. Several framed photos of Shikamaru and his family adorned the walls, moments captured from different points in their lives. The interior design was simple, using earth tones and rustic furniture. Naruto could feel the warmth of the place, the love embedded in every corner. Yoshino smiled at him. "It's nice to meet you, Naruto-kun. I'm surprised Shikamaru's up already, too. Normally, I'd have to drag him out of bed by noon." Naruto grinned. "I thought so too. But I guess his dad has other plans." Yoshino laughed. "Shikaku insists on keeping him busy. He's been trying to get Shikamaru to take his training seriously for years, and this training session with you is just the excuse he needed." She waved her hand dismissively, as if she wasn't bothered by it. The lazy bum needs a kick in the pants every once in a while. Naruto couldn't help but laugh at the image of Shikamaru being dragged into something he didn't want to do. Sounds like a typical day for him. They reached the patio, where Shikamaru and his father were seated across from each other, playing shogi. The game board was spread out between them, and both were deep in concentration. "Hey, you two. Hurry up and finish that game. Naruto-kun's here for his training," Yoshino called out, lightly patting Naruto on the back as she directed him to the seating area. As Naruto walked closer, he couldn't help but notice the striking resemblance between Shikamaru and his father. The older man had the same lazy demeanor, the same dark hair, and even the same tired expression. The only things that set him apart were the deep scars etched across his face and the scruffy goatee that adorned his chin. "All right, let's finish up this match," Shikamaru's father said, his voice gravelly but warm. "Good to meet you, Naruto. I've heard a lot of interesting things from Hokage-sama." Naruto gave the men a firm handshake. "Good to meet you too. Sounds like Shikamaru's been trying to beat you for a while now." Shikamaru grunted from the side, glancing sideways at Naruto with a glare that held no heat. "Yeah, I'm getting sick of losing every time," he muttered under his breath, causing Naruto to smirk. Shikamaru's father chuckled. "He's come close a few times. But he's not quite ready yet." Naruto watched as Shikamaru huffed and began packing up the shogi pieces. "Whatever," he said, rolling his eyes. "Let's get this over with. I've been wondering what kind of training I'll be doing all week." Shikaku stood up, stretching his arms. "You didn't tell him." Shikamaru groaned, clearly irritated. "I wasn't sure how much I was supposed to say." Shikaku raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. "I'll go ahead and explain the basics as we walk. I'll leave the details up to you, Shikamaru." Naruto followed them, feeling a mix of curiosity and excitement. Today was just the beginning, but it felt like the first real step towards something important. The trio walked along the wooden path, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the still morning air. As they approached the Nara clan's indoor training grounds, Shikamaru's curiosity was piqued. He had never seen the inside of this particular building and was left wondering, just what kind of training do they do here with Naruto? The building was much larger than it appeared from the outside, built like a medium-sized gymnasium. The floor was scattered with various objects, and the walls and ceiling were adorned with a combination of natural candles, torches, and mechanical lights. The illumination cast strange shadows across the room, shifting and stretching as they moved. In the far corner of the room were several training puppets, likely intended for the clan's signature shadow possession jutsu. Naruto took in the surroundings with wide eyes. Shikaku flicked a switch, illuminating the room with bright overhead lights, revealing even more space than the building had let on. The room was clearly designed to be versatile, offering numerous potential scenarios for training with shadows. Naruto could already imagine how effective the Nara clan's techniques could be when used in such an environment. "Well, first things first, Naruto," Shikaku said, turning toward him with a focused expression. "What do you have to work with right now? Once I get a sense of what you're capable of, we can decide where to go from there." Naruto nodded, stepping forward into a relatively empty part of the room, which appeared to be a sparring circle about 15 feet in diameter. He channeled chakra to his eye, feeling the dark energy flow through him as he prepared to demonstrate his abilities. "I've been working on my first technique and branching out from there," Naruto explained, his tone a little unsure. "But I'm not quite sure what my limits are yet." "All right, show me what you've got," Shikaku instructed. He stepped back, motioning for the boy to continue. Naruto hesitated for only a moment before flicking his hand forward. At his command, a series of shadowy spikes shot out from the floor in front of him, each one growing to several feet in length, forming a line across the sparring circle. Shikamaru's eyes widened comically as he watched the shadowy projectiles spring to life. It was clear he hadn't expected anything like this from Naruto. But Naruto wasn't done yet. As the spikes receded into the shadows, his eye glowed beneath his eye patch, the energy within him surging as he activated his next technique. A dozen shadowy fists materialized in the air around him, each one in a different position. The fists surged forward, each one slamming into a single point in the center of the circle with a deafening thud. The sound of the impacts rang out across the room, vibrating through the walls. Shikamaru and Shikaku stood in stunned silence, watching as Naruto directed the shadow fists to attack. It wasn't until the barrage stopped that Naruto's next move became apparent. Without flinching, he raised his hand, and his own shadow stretched and rose from the floor, interlocking with other shadow tendrils to form a thick, shield-like barrier in front of him. The shadow fists, which had just finished their assault on the training ring, turned around to attack Naruto directly. The boy's shadow shield withstood each blow, absorbing the punches without so much as a crack, the sounds of each impact reverberating through the room. After a few moments, the fists stopped, and Naruto's shield dissipated, returning the shadows to their natural state. Shikamaru was frozen, staring at Naruto with his mouth agape. His father wasn't much better. Both were stunned by the sheer power and versatility of the techniques Naruto had just demonstrated. Shikaku's mind raced as he assessed the situation. Only 2 weeks, and he already has jutsu at this level? The strength and speed of those shadow fists alone would be enough to overwhelm a lot of Chunin. And that shield. If it can hold up against elemental techniques, I'd consider it at least B rank. He shook his head, still processing what he had just witnessed. "Those are some impressive moves, Naruto," Shikaku commented, breaking the silence. "The speed and strength of those spikes and fists definitely merit a C rank. We'll have to test that shield's durability against elemental jutsu, but it could easily be B rank, depending on how well it holds up." Shikamaru continued to stare blankly at the boy, still trying to wrap his mind around what he had just seen. How did he even? The questions kept piling up in his head, but he couldn't make sense of them. Naruto scratched his head sheepishly, unsure of how to respond. He hadn't expected the jutsu to impress them so much. He had simply been practicing what he could. C-rank techniques were combat-ready, intended for high-level genin and low-level chunin. They were the techniques one would use in real combat, much like the Uchiha clan's fireball jutsu. Shikamaru finally snapped out of his stupor, rubbing his temples in frustration. "Okay, what the hell is going on? How did Naruto do all that without using any hand signs?" Shikaku exchanged a knowing look with Naruto, who shrugged in response. After a beat, Shikaku stepped forward, gesturing for Naruto to explain. "If you want answers, you'll have to ask him. I'm not about to say anything he doesn't want me to." Naruto chuckled nervously, sensing Shikamaru's growing frustration. He decided to give a simplified version of his story, leaving out a few details. "Well, I made a deal with the King of Shadows. Ever since then, I've just been powering through on my own, figuring things out without much guidance." Shikamaru, still rubbing his temples, looked at Naruto as if he had just lost his mind. "So you're telling me you made a deal with some Shadow King, and now you can just make shadows do whatever you want?" Naruto hesitated before responding. I know it sounds weird, but yeah. That's pretty much it? But I can't really bring back the dead's shadows or anything like that. Some things are better left unsaid, right? Shikamaru's eye twitched as he processed the information. So troublesome, he muttered under his breath. You're the most unpredictable person I've ever met. Naruto smirked at the remark. That's not necessarily a bad thing, you know. Shikamaru sighed deeply, shaking his head. So, what now? Shikako stood up from his spot against the wall, finally stepping forward to take control of the situation. Now, we train, he said. I'll show Naruto one of our shadow immersion meditations while you work on your shadow neckbind. With that, Shikamaru groaned, clearly not thrilled about being sent off to practice on his own. He headed toward the practice dummies, while Naruto followed Shikako to a darker corner of the room, where they would begin the next phase of training. Shikako instructed Naruto to sit quietly and focus on his shadow energy. Naruto did as instructed, his chakra flowing through him as he began to feel the shadows envelop his body. He concentrated, trying to understand the shadows better, sensing their presence. Time passed as he entered a deeper, more focused state. As he entered the meditation deeper, the whispers of the shadows became clearer. Open your eyes, they urged. Naruto obeyed, blinking in surprise when his surroundings shifted. What he saw was nothing like what he expected. He was surrounded by pure darkness, with faint beams of light filtering down from an unseen ceiling. The light seemed to distort the space, making everything appear as though seen through a fisheye lens. He turned around, trying to make sense of it all. Shadow. Plane. Naruto's eyes widened as the realization hit him. I'm in the shadow realm. He turned his gaze upward, spotting Shikamaru's distorted shadow on the floor, practicing his techniques. The light shifted, casting his shadow along the floor in strange patterns. Holy crap, I can go into shadows too. Naruto exclaimed aloud, startling both Shikamaru and Shikaku. Wa Naruto. Where the hell are you? Shikamaru cried, looking around frantically. Shikaku glanced over at the corner of the room, where Naruto had been meditating moments ago. Now, he was gone. Down here, I think? I'm in your shadow, came the voice, but they could see no sign of him. Both Nara clan members looked down at the floor, confused and amazed. Shikaku was the first to speak up, his voice tinged with disbelief. Okay, how the hell did you get in there? Naruto's form slowly materialized from the shadow, rising as though the floor was lifting him up. That was trippy, he muttered. It's so dark down there. Both Nara stared at the boy in awe. That's impossible, Shikamaru murmured, shaking his head. I've never heard of someone entering another person's shadow. Naruto scratched his head awkwardly. Well, I guess I just did. He grinned. I don't know how it works, but it felt pretty cool. Shikaku sighed deeply, realizing that Naruto's abilities were far beyond anything he had expected. It looks like we have no idea what this boy is capable of yet. The hours passed slowly as Naruto continued to receive guidance from Shikamaru, refining his control and understanding of his unique shadow abilities. Meanwhile, Shikamaru was slowly coming to terms with the idea of having Naruto's shadow-based techniques integrated into their training regimen. The concept of shadows obeying the will of another shinobi was still a strange idea to him. Despite his clan's mastery over the shadows, having someone with such an unpredictable and powerful relationship to them was troubling, to say the least. It was noon when their Jonin instructor, Shikaku, decided to call a break. The sparring session that had kept the two genin busy came to an abrupt halt as Shikaku surveyed their progress. Naruto, now a little more agile after refining his movement techniques, stood before the older men with a satisfied grin. Shikamaru, however, walked toward them at a much slower pace, clearly exhausted. Let's grab some lunch for now, "Boys," Shikaka called to them, his voice warm but commanding. "We'll resume training afterward once you've had a chance to rest." At their nods, Shikaka led them back to his home. Behind him, the two genin began to converse about the day's events. "Thanks for the tips, Shikamaru. The vanishing step is getting way easier to control now," Naruto said with a grin, clearly proud of his improvement. "No problem," Shikamaru grumbled, though his tone lacked real frustration. "You would have figured it out soon enough. It's just weird how easy it's been for you to control your shadows. It's like they actually listen to you, like obedient little dogs." Naruto laughed at the comment, glancing to the side as he tried to mask the dark secret he was keeping. "Yeah, better not tell him that the shadows are practically helping me train." The thought of Shikamaru knowing about the extent of his new abilities almost made him laugh out loud. As they arrived at the Nara household, Shikamaru's mother greeted them with a cheerful smile. "Oh, good timing, boys. I was just about to call you in. Lunch is almost ready, go wash up, and I'll finish it off." "Yes, dear." Shikamaru and his father chorused in unison. Naruto, still not used to such hospitality, hesitated for a moment. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate it, but kindness was rare for him outside of his close friends and a few select people. He didn't want to impose. Shikamaru noticed his hesitation and popped his head back through the doorway. "What are you waiting for? Go clean up before Mom blows a fuse. Trust me, you don't want to deal with that today." With a resigned sigh, Naruto followed Shikamaru to the bathroom, where they quickly washed up before heading back to the dining table. XXXX. After a delicious lunch, the three shinobi returned to their training in the forest behind the Nara residence. The afternoon session focused on further honing Naruto's control over his ability to merge with the shadows. The trio was eager to test the limits of his power. As the training progressed, they made some startling discoveries about the nature of Naruto's abilities. The first revelation came when they tested the limits of Naruto's ability to enter the shadow plane. Unlike his usual ability to manipulate shadows, this power allowed him to physically step into the shadows, but only under certain conditions. He could enter any shadow that was large enough to accommodate his body, but the catch was that the shadow had to be in a darker place. He could not enter shadows in direct sunlight. However, in the shaded areas of the forest, Naruto could step into shadows with relative ease, sinking into them after entering a meditative state. "Looks like this shadow ability is tied to the amount of darkness available," Shikaka remarked as he observed Naruto's progress. "If you can't find a deep enough shadow, you will have to wait for the right conditions." Naruto nodded, having anticipated this limitation but still eager to figure out how to use it to his advantage. "It's not perfect yet, but I can see how this could be useful in battle. Imagine being able to disappear into shadows during a fight, just to reappear behind my enemy." The second realization, however, was much more unexpected. During his spar with Shikamaru, Naruto had purposefully tried to use his shadow to bind his opponent, but something unusual happened. As soon as Naruto's shadow touched Shikamaru's, it simply stopped. The two shadows refused to connect. It was as though the shadow possession jutsu had been rejected by Naruto's own shadow. Despite Shikamaru's best attempts, his shadow manipulation jutsu wouldn't work against Naruto, leaving him confused. "Why isn't it working?" Shikamaru muttered under his breath, attempting the technique several more times with no success. "This shouldn't be happening." Shikaku, who had been observing the training, crossed his arms thoughtfully. "This is unusual. Even my shadow manipulation techniques aren't working on you, Naruto. What's going on here?" Both father and son looked at each other, bewildered by the development. It was as if Naruto's connection to the shadows was somehow rejecting their influence, rendering Shikamaru's jutsu useless. The mystery of Naruto's abilities had deepened even further. "This is something new," Shikako said, furrowing his brows. We'll need more time to fully understand the extent of your abilities, Naruto. Though their progress had hit an unexpected roadblock, the day's training session came to an end as dusk settled over the village. Shikaku called for a break, and the three shinobi made their way back to the Nara house. Thanks a lot for the help today, Shikaku-san, Naruto said as they walked back. I've learned so much already. I didn't expect to discover so much about my powers in just one day. Shikaku smiled warmly at him. No problem, kid. Hokage-sama asked us to help, but I would have done it regardless. It's not every day you meet someone who can strike a deal with the king and live to tell about it. Shikamaru grumbled under his breath, clearly exhausted from the training. I still can't believe you. Such a troublesome guy. Naruto flashed him a teasing grin. You're just jealous, Shikamaru. You wish you had these cool shadow powers too. You're right, Shikamaru muttered, his voice filled with resignation. It'd be a lot easier if my shadows were obedient like yours. He grumbled some more, earning a laugh from Naruto. Hey, feel free to come back next weekend, Shikaku said with a smile. You've been a good motivator for Shikamaru. Maybe next time, I won't have to listen to him complain so much. Naruto gave a thumbs up, his enthusiasm clear. Definitely. I can already feel myself getting stronger, and I'm excited to see where this goes. After bidding farewell to the Nara family, Naruto left for his home, a sense of anticipation building inside him. The training had been exhausting, but incredibly fruitful. He still had so much to learn, especially about his shadow abilities, but he was eager to keep pushing forward. As he leaped through the trees on his way home, his mind wandered to what the next week would bring. XXXX. Back at the Nara household, Shikaku and Yoshino shared a quiet moment as they cleaned up after the day's training. So, how was it? Yoshino asked, looking at her husband. Not bad, Shikaku replied, smiling fondly. Naruto's a good kid. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with when he grows up. And Shikamaru, well, he complained the whole time, but I think he had fun. Having someone his age to train with in the shadow techniques has pushed him harder than he's been in a while. Such a troublesome blonde, Shikamaru muttered as he walked by, but there was no real bitterness in his voice. I think this is going to be more work than dealing with Ino's team. Yoshino chuckled, watching her son disappear into another room. I'm sure Shikamaru will manage just fine. He might even enjoy having a new challenge. XXXX. The following weekend, Naruto spent his days training, pushing himself to learn more about his abilities and how they could be applied in combat. He focused especially on his connection with the shadow plane and the unexpected restriction on his shadow powers. Though he couldn't enter every shadow just yet, the potential of his unique ability had become clearer with each passing day. He still had many questions, but for now, he was content to continue learning on his own. On Monday, Team 8 resumed their usual training under Kurene's guidance. After weeks of basic drills and exercises, their sensei was ready to move on to the next stage. It was time for them to take on real missions. Kurene gathered her team in the Hokage Tower's Mission Dispatch Center. I'm pleased to say that you all have done a great job in training. You've got a good grasp on teamwork, so now we'll start focusing on mission work and advanced jutsu collaboration. The genin were excited. Naruto was ready to prove himself. Shikamaru sighed, already anticipating the extra work ahead. Hinata, though shy, was eager to step up and prove herself. And Shikaku's son was on a path of unexpected growth, his powers and bond with Naruto strengthening as the days went by. The world of the shinobi, the warriors who fought with chakra and unnatural power, was one of adventure, honor, and danger. They were the legends of the elemental nations, figures of who wielded techniques capable of shaping the world. From the stories passed down in every village, one could only dream of becoming as great as these men and women, the greatest shinobi of their time. Among these legends, there were 3 names that stood out above all others, whose feats and abilities were woven into the very fabric of the shinobi world. Sarutobi Hiruzen, known as the Professor, was revered for his mastery over hundreds of jutsu and his vast knowledge, earning him the title of the God of Shinobi. His skill in battle was unmatched, and his heart for the people of Konoha knew no equal. Then there was Hanzo the Salamander, the terrifying ruler of a Megakure, whose power alone had driven legendary students of Hiruzen to the edge of death. His presence alone instilled fear across the land, for no one could stand against him for long. And, of course, Oniki the Fence-Sitter, the third Tsuchikage of Iwagakure. Master of the rare and dangerous dust release, he was a force of nature in battle. His power had no comparison, and only a handful dared challenge him. These 3 men, together, became the great pillars of the shinobi world. Their stories filled the minds of every young aspiring ninja, tales of combat, heroism, and unwavering willpower. Every child who grew up hearing these legends, from the lowest of peasants to the noblest of families, dreamed of following in their footsteps. But dreams had a way of being dashed against the hard rock of reality. One such child, a young genin named Uzumaki Naruto, had once been captivated by these stories. He imagined himself as a hero, fighting for justice and glory, one day standing tall as the Hokage, the protector and leader of his village. In his mind, his future was bright, filled with battles and victories. But now, as Naruto stood in the middle of a neglected backyard, the weeds around him practically laughing in his face, he couldn't help but mutter, "This is so not a mission." He wasn't the only one feeling this way. His teammate, Shino Aberame, stood a few yards away, calmly using his insects to eradicate the pests plaguing the garden, his face as unreadable as ever. "It is not among the options I thought of as well," Shino replied with his usual monotone. It had been nearly 2 months since Naruto and his fellow classmates had graduated from the academy and officially became genin of Konoha. And as every new generation learned, the reality of being a shinobi was far different from the tales of heroism they had grown up hearing. The young shinobi of Team 8, consisting of Naruto, Shino, Hinata, and their sensei Kurane, had spent the last few weeks performing D-rank missions. These tasks were the most mundane, often involving nothing more than taking care of mundane chores. Babysitting council members' children, gardening for the elderly, and walking the dogs of the Inyazuka clan, nothing that could be considered exciting or glorious. Today's mission was no exception. It was a multi-task mission and a house belonging to a lower-ranking council member, whose wife had recently given birth to twins. With the mother needing some time to relax, Team 8 was tasked with caring for the household, including watching over the twins and taking care of various chores around the yard. Naruto and Shino had been sent to work outside in the backyard, where the garden had long since been overtaken by wild plants, leaving the area in a state of neglect. It was up to Naruto to clear the weeds, while Shino was tasked with ridding the area of pests using his insects. As Naruto started his task, he couldn't help but feel the sting of disappointment. He had always dreamed of thrilling battles, of fighting to protect the village and become its leader. Instead, he was stuck pulling weeds. With a sigh, he called out to the shadows around him. Could the shadows eat all the plants the client wanted gone? His chakra extended to his shadows, and to his delight, the dark tendrils stretched across the ground, swallowing up the weeds and removing them from existence. Within minutes, the garden was cleared. Shino, ever observant, watched the display. Your shadow powers are simply astonishing. They have such versatile applications in every situation. Naruto chuckled modestly. They have their uses. Ever since the incident on the night of the Uchiha massacre, an event that had shaken him to his core, Naruto had changed. He was no longer the same carefree prankster he had once been. His abilities had grown, and with them, his responsibilities. He had honed his shadow techniques, developing them into a versatile and powerful tool. Yet, even as he grew stronger, he maintained his cheerful disposition, something that made him stand out even more. Hinata, who had once been shy and timid, had also noticed the changes in Naruto. She had been motivated to work harder on her own abilities, inspired by the strength he had gained. She could no longer allow herself to be left behind by him. Meanwhile, Shino had become accustomed to the enigma that was Naruto. The boy had always been a mystery, but since that fateful night, he had grown more focused and determined. It wasn't hard to see that Naruto was no longer the carefree child he had once been, but a young man with a purpose. Despite his increased seriousness, Naruto still hadn't lost his sense of humor or his energetic spirit. But the shadow of his past hung over him, and it drove him forward, pushing him to reach new heights, even if it meant facing the harsh realities of being a shinobi. As Naruto continued to clear the yard, the sound of a creaking push mower interrupted his thoughts. He grumbled, struggling to make the rusty mower work. It was another menial task, one he hadn't expected to find himself doing when he first dreamed of becoming Hokage. When Kurane arrived to check on the progress, she couldn't help but smile at the sight of Naruto struggling with the old mower. Despite the frustration, she could tell he was still giving it his all. "Hey, you two," she called out, walking over to where the two boys were working. "The client will be back soon, so I wanted to check on how you're doing." Naruto gave her a half-hearted wave. "I'm about done back here, just gotta finish the front and I'll be good." Shino adjusted his glasses and spoke calmly, "My insects have cleared the yard of all pests. We just need to set up deterrents to prevent future infestations." Kurane nodded, pleased with their progress. "Good work, both of you. I'll head inside and get ready for the client's return." The mission had been relatively easy for the most part, but it had left all of them feeling bored and uninspired. The work was mundane, and their sense of adventure had long since faded. But for the moment, they could only endure the grind. An hour later, the client returned, a tired but thankful woman who had finally been able to relax. She was delighted with the work teammate had done, from the trimmed lawn to the peaceful twins sleeping in their cribs. She shook Kurane's hand, praising the genin for their work. "Thank you so much. My husband just never listens to me. He's too cheap to hire a nanny, but this was such a relief," she said, handing over the payment and signing the confirmation slip. Shikamaru, who had been cleaning the house, was in no better mood than the others. "What kind of idiot stacks books on top of magazines like that? Damn near had a full bookshelf fall on my head," he muttered, his face a mixture of annoyance and exhaustion. With the confirmation slip in hand, Kurane led her team out of the house. As they walked down the path, she observed their body language. Naruto looked grumpy. As always, Shino's neutral expression was slightly tighter than usual. Hinata seemed content, but there was a spark of longing for something more exciting, and Shikamaru, well, Shikamaru just looked like he wanted a nap. "How about we call it a day?" Kurane suggested. "I'll report in, and you guys can head home and relax. I think I'll request something a bit more exciting for tomorrow." Shikamaru wasted no time, his face lighting up at the idea of a break. "That sounds great," he muttered, already heading in the direction of home. Naruto looked at Kurane with interest. "What kind of mission are we doing tomorrow?" "You'll find out in the morning. I need to check what's available first," Kurane replied, offering a small smile. "Gotcha, sensei," Naruto responded, waving goodbye to Shino and Hinata before heading off on his own. The day had been long, and his stomach was already growling. It was time for some food before another day of D-rank missions. As he walked off, Naruto couldn't help but think about his future. His dream of becoming Hokage still burned brightly in his chest, but the path there wasn't as simple as he had once imagined. Being a shinobi wasn't all about grand battles and heroic deeds. Sometimes, it was about doing the small things, the thankless jobs that kept the village running. And though he may not have enjoyed every minute of his tasks, he knew it was all part of the journey. He was going to keep moving forward, no matter how many weeds he had to pull. After all, it was the path he had chosen. A nice big meal at Ichiraku's ramen shop gave Naruto all the energy he needed for the rest of the day. The warm, satisfying broth and the delicious noodles filled him up, making him feel ready for anything. Yet, instead of rushing off to train right away, Naruto decided to take a walk. It was a beautiful afternoon, and the crisp spring air was perfect for strolling. Besides, he figured he could digest his meal before starting his next training session. It wasn't every day he treated himself to ramen, after all. As he meandered through the village, Naruto noticed how the streets were bustling with life. The air was filled with the sounds of people going about their day, families enjoying their time together, couples strolling hand in hand, children laughing as they played. The village was alive with the pulse of everyday life, and for a moment, Naruto allowed himself to feel a part of it all. But that moment was short-lived. As Naruto walked, he began to notice the stares. It wasn't new, he'd been dealing with them for years now, but today it felt particularly heavy. Villagers glanced at him as they went about their business, their eyes flicking toward him with a mix of suspicion and unease. Some averted their gaze altogether, pretending he wasn't even there, while others watched him with a wariness that bordered on fear. It was as if he was a ticking time bomb, an explosive tag just waiting to detonate. Naruto used to get angry when he noticed these looks, but now, after everything that had happened, he could understand why they saw him that way. What he didn't understand were the ones who looked at him with open hatred, as if he was responsible for the terrible things that had happened before his birth. It frustrated him to no end. He couldn't control what had happened that night, couldn't control the demon fox that had ravaged the village. But still, some people treated him like he was the one who had caused it all. That he was the monster. The demon. Naruto's chest tightened as he thought about it. The worst of it, the looks he hated the most, were the ones that were full of disdain. The cold, indifferent gazes that made him feel like he wasn't even worth acknowledging. Those were the hardest to bear, because they made him feel like he didn't matter at all. Like he shouldn't even be alive. It was a feeling he had experienced far too often, and each time, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. The frustration started to bubble up inside of him, so much so that he had to stop walking. He stood there for a moment, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He felt the weight of it all, his loneliness, the neglect, the fear, and hatred he constantly faced. The hope that things would get better was slipping away, replaced by a creeping sense of doubt. Ugh. Naruto muttered under his breath. Why do I even bother trying to fit in? He shook his head and climbed up onto the nearby roof, hoping the height would give him some perspective. It wasn't that he didn't want to train, it was just that today, the village's treatment of him had taken the wind out of his sails. He didn't expect people to suddenly treat him like a hero, but a little respect wouldn't hurt. As he leapt from rooftop to rooftop, Naruto's mind wandered. He thought about his team, about the bonds they were forming. He wasn't alone anymore. Shino, Hinata, even Kurane-sensei, he wasn't some solitary figure like he had been before. And yet, as much as he tried to stay positive, the weight of the villagers' indifference pressed down on him. Stupid villagers, he muttered, his voice filled with irritation. I'll show them. Be happy I'm not the monster they think I am, or they'd all be dead by now. The thought was dark, and a part of him felt disgusted by it, but another part of him didn't feel all that wrong for thinking it. They didn't deserve his mercy, but he wasn't going to let himself become the monster they thought him to be. He had to prove them wrong, somehow. The frustration lingered, but he forced it down as he approached his apartment. His training could still be productive, even if his mind wasn't fully in it today. He could focus on his shadow jutsu. Maybe some training would clear his head. But then, something unusual caught his attention. There were voices, loud voices coming from the street below. Curious, Naruto hopped down from the roof and crouched low, peering over the edge to see what was going on. What he saw made his blood run cold. A group of 3 men stood in a semicircle around a young woman, blocking her path. The men looked like typical thugs, rough around the edges with disheveled clothes and a swagger that screamed arrogance. The young woman, on the other hand, was a stark contrast. She was beautiful, her long brown hair pulled into a fancy braid, and she wore a traveler's kimono adorned with delicate orange and yellow flowers. From the way she held herself, she seemed out of place on the street, far too refined for the rough environment she was currently in. The men's words were loud and crude, cutting through the air. "What do you say, missy? Wanna come and play with us? We'll make it worth your while. Believe us." They laughed lecherously, and it was clear they were closing in on her, invading her personal space. Naruto clenched his fists, his instincts kicking in. This was wrong. No one deserved to be treated like this. The woman was clearly uncomfortable, her face flushed with embarrassment and fear. Naruto glanced around quickly. No one was intervening. The bystanders on the street turned away, pretending they didn't see what was happening. Some were even quickening their pace, trying to avoid the situation altogether. But what struck Naruto as odd was the lack of any ninja nearby. Normally, there would be someone keeping an eye on things, especially with the tension that seemed to be brewing. But today, there was no one. The shadows told the same story: no one of any real skill was nearby. It was up to him, then. The shadows at his feet stirred as he gathered his chakra. He couldn't just stand by and do nothing. With a single motion, he extended his hands out in front of him, as if grasping something. The shadows around him rippled, and before the thugs could even react, hands began to form from the ground beneath them. The shadows shot out, wrapping around the men's legs and wrists, pinning them in place. They struggled, their eyes wide in panic as they tried to pull away, but the more they fought, the tighter the shadows became. Naruto pulled his hands toward him in a swift motion, and the shadows slammed the men into the ground with a brutal force, knocking the wind out of them. The third man, who had been standing a few feet away, spun around just in time to see his comrades drop to the ground in dazed confusion. Before he could react, Naruto landed on top of him, stomping the men into the dirt. He made sure the men were thoroughly incapacitated, their eyes fluttering as they slipped into unconsciousness. With the immediate threat taken care of, Naruto turned his attention to the woman, offering her a reassuring smile. "You okay? Looked like you needed a hand there." The woman blinked in surprise, clearly taken aback by his sudden intervention. She had been staring at him in disbelief, her mouth slightly agape. "Oh my. Thank you so much. Those 3, they had been bothering me for so long, I thought no one would come to help me." She glanced around at the other people in the street, all of whom had quickly dispersed, eager to avoid confrontation. Her gaze hardened as she looked at the bystanders, clearly furious at their indifference. Naruto could see the resentment in her eyes, and it made him feel a little less alone in his frustration with the village. "I thank you again," she said, her voice softer now, as she took in the boy's appearance for the first time. She noticed his outfit: a black jacket with dark orange trim, a mesh armor shirt beneath, and black pants. His spiky blonde hair framed his face, and his vibrant blue eyes were intense, filled with a strange sense of determination. Her eyes lingered on his covered eye, her curiosity piqued. If not for his age, he looked every bit the ninja she had always imagined. Naruto, in turn, studied her. She was older than him, maybe by a few years, but she had an elegance to her that made her stand out. Her kimono was simple, but the colors were striking, and the intricate braid of her long brown hair only added to her grace. Her eyes, a warm brown, reflected both gratitude and a hint of intrigue as she looked at him. Catching herself staring, the woman quickly bowed in gratitude. "Oh my, forgive me for staring. It's just, this is the first time I've seen a ninja in action. Naruto chuckled, waving off her apology. No problem. It's not every day you get to see one in action around here. He looked back at the three unconscious men, still lying in the dirt. Maybe we should get out of here, he muttered, unsure how long it would take for the thugs to come to their senses. The woman nodded quickly, her eyes darting to the side, her face showing a slight tinge of embarrassment. Yes, that would be best. Together, they made their way through the village, leaving the scene behind them. As they walked, Naruto couldn't help but feel that, despite everything, maybe today wasn't such a bad day after all. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden glow over the village of Konoha. The bustling streets, alive with the movement of vendors, villagers, and travelers, seemed to hum with energy as Naruto Uzumaki walked alongside the young woman he had recently helped. After a tense, if not slightly awkward, encounter with the group of would-be aggressors, the two had found themselves sitting down for a much-needed cup of tea at one of teammates' favorite cafes. It was a quaint little place, with wooden tables set under umbrellas to shield patrons from the heat of the day, and the soft clinking of cups and quiet chatter filled the air. Naruto, having been more accustomed to solitary meals or eating on the go, found himself enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the cafe. The warmth of the tea felt comforting in his hands, and as he took a sip, his mind was momentarily distracted from his usual, more troublesome thoughts. He glanced across the table at the young woman sitting before him, a slight sense of curiosity piqued in his mind. After all, it wasn't every day that he found himself helping a stranger out of a situation like the one they had just encountered. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, nice to meet you, he introduced himself with a smile, offering a slight bow of his head in an attempt to make things a little less formal. Kimura Tsuya, the woman he had helped earlier, blinked in surprise at first but quickly returned the bow with a graceful one of her own. How I've forgotten my manners. It's a pleasure to meet you, Naruto-san, she replied politely, her voice soft and melodic, with an air of elegance that hinted at the more refined world from which she came. Naruto leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her. She looked like someone who didn't quite belong in Konoha, her attire and demeanor making her stand out amongst the more casual villagers. She had a certain air of sophistication about her, something that drew him in despite his usual rough-around-the-edges personality. So, I gotta ask, he began, leaning forward with genuine curiosity, how exactly did you end up in that situation? What were you doing with those guys? His words were light, but his mind was still working over the strange events that had unfolded. Something about it all didn't sit right with him. Tsuya hesitated for a moment, her expression turning a little more thoughtful. She wrapped her fingers around her teacup and took a sip, her eyes drifting slightly as she gathered her thoughts. My mother and I have been traveling around Hinokuni for the past few months for her work, she began, her voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. She's an artist, you see. We've been visiting various towns and cities, painting the landscapes and people to increase her notoriety. You could say we've been on a bit of a tour. Naruto nodded along as she spoke, taking in her story. He could see why she would be unfamiliar with the ways of the village, though the idea of traveling as an artist seemed intriguing. It wasn't exactly a life he could relate to, but he appreciated the idea of living in a world full of new experiences, painting the very landscapes and people around you. We arrived in Konoha just a few days ago, she continued, her tone warming as she spoke about the village. Everything was so fascinating. This is the first shinobi village I've ever visited, and I just had to explore it all, soak in the sights. There's so much history here, so much to see. Naruto could understand that. Konoha was, after all, his home, though he rarely paused to appreciate its grandeur, the history that ran deep within the stone walls and the traditions that governed its very existence. He knew better than anyone how mysterious and dangerous the life of a shinobi could be, but to an outsider, Konoha was likely a wondrous place to discover. I ended up getting a little lost today, Tsuya continued, her voice darkening slightly as the smile slipped from her lips. I was wandering through the village, taking in the sights, when I came across those men. They seemed friendly at first, showing me around, even telling me about local restaurants and museums. I thought they were just being kind, helping me find my way around. Naruto raised an eyebrow. It seemed like the typical kind of encounter one might expect in a busy village, but there was a noticeable change in Tsuya's expression now, her mood shifting as she spoke. After we visited one of the museums, that's when everything changed, she said, her voice quieter now. They started acting different. First, it was subtle small things like lingering too long, asking strange questions, but as time went on, they became more insistent, more aggressive. I didn't feel safe anymore. Naruto's brow furrowed as he listened, his gaze narrowing as he processed her words. He could feel his instincts kicking in. The men's shift in behavior was odd, but it wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility. He had seen his fair share of people who had hidden agendas, but there was something in her tone that suggested more than just a random encounter. So they followed you around until you ended up at that bar? He asked, trying to piece together the chain of events. Yes, Tsuya nodded, her fingers nervously tapping against the edge of her cup. And that's when you showed up, Naruto said. I don't know what they wanted, but I knew I didn't want to find out. Naruto leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He mulled over the situation, his mind running through possibilities. The sudden personality shift was unsettling. Had they been drinking? Possibly. But then again, Naruto thought, could it have been something more? A genjutsu, perhaps. He considered the idea briefly but dismissed it. There were no signs of anything unusual around the area. Not even a hint of chakra interference. Could they have been spies? Maybe, but it didn't seem likely. The more he thought about it, the more he realized it was probably nothing more than bad luck, nothing more than some drunken fools who had decided to act inappropriately. Still, something about it was nagging at him. He couldn't put his finger on it. But then, as if to break his train of thought, their tea arrived. They both took a sip, the warmth of the drink filling the space between them as Naruto tried to clear his head of the paranoia. The conversation shifted toward lighter topics, and soon Naruto was able to forget about the unease that had been settling in his chest. Tsuya spoke more about her mother's work and their travels, and Naruto found himself genuinely interested. It was a rare thing for him to be this captivated by someone else's story. Usually, he was too caught up in his own whirlwind of training and mischief, but today was different. XXXX. After a comfortable silence and a bit more idle conversation, the two finished their tea, and Naruto decided it was time to seek Tsuya back to her hotel. He didn't think she was in immediate danger anymore, but given how things had unfolded, he wanted to make sure she made it there safely. They walked together through the bustling streets, heading toward one of the nicer hotels in Konoha, one that was frequently visited by affluent guests and even some diplomats from other nations. The area was quieter here, more upscale, and the two walked without incident for the most part. But as they entered the hotel's lobby, a new and unexpected sight greeted them. The door was barely closed when Tsuya was abruptly scooped up into a tight hug by a woman whose beauty could rival any actress. The woman spun her daughter around in a joyous bear hug, much to Tsuya's surprise, and Naruto could only blink in bewilderment as he watched the scene unfold. Her mother, Kimura Midori, was a striking woman with long, dark hair and a commanding presence. She wore a golden red kimono that glimmered under the warm lighting, and the look of relief on her face was unmistakable. Her eyes were wide with worry, and as soon as she had set her daughter down, she turned her full attention to the young girl. "Where have you been?" Midori exclaimed in a frantic voice. "I was so worried about you." Tsuya looked guilty as her mother jostled her gently. "I got lost in the village and got into some trouble, but Naruto-san here was there to save me. I'm fine, Ka-san. Naruto stood awkwardly off to the side, trying not to draw attention to himself as Tsuya explained the situation to her mother. It wasn't exactly the warm, heartfelt reunion he had expected, but it certainly seemed to be a deeply emotional one. When Tsuya mentioned his involvement in the situation, her mother's attention snapped to him immediately. Midori sized him up with a careful gaze, her eyes taking in his features. Naruto shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny, not used to being looked at so intensely. A little scrawny, Midori remarked, causing Naruto to twitch in slight offense. But then she softened, her expression warming as she gave him a genuine smile. But you look capable. Thank you for keeping my daughter safe, she added with a graceful bow. Naruto scratched the side of his covered eye awkwardly, his face flushing a little. It was no problem, really. It wasn't that difficult. He shifted his weight, trying to divert attention away from himself. Midori smiled warmly again. Still, thank you. Let me introduce myself. I am Kimura Midori. Uzumaki Naruto, genin of Konoha, Naruto said, giving her a polite nod in return. A pleasure, Naruto-kun, Midori said, her voice soft and sincere. She reached out and took his hand, her gaze pleading. Please, allow me to reward you for keeping my daughter safe. It's the least I can do. Naruto hesitated, his instincts telling him to politely decline. He was used to people offering rewards, but he wasn't comfortable accepting them, especially not for something he considered to be just part of the job. No, that's fine. I don't need a reward. I just did what anyone would have done, he said, shifting uncomfortably. But Midori was insistent. She gave him a pleading look, her voice filled with gratitude. I must insist, Naruto-kun. You have no idea what my Tsu-chan could have gone through if it wasn't for you. I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing I hadn't rewarded the brave young man who saved my daughter. Naruto, feeling the weight of her persistence and starting to feel distinctly uncomfortable, sighed. If you insist so much, I guess it would be rude to refuse then, huh? He muttered, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. A bright smile lit up Midori's face as she nodded enthusiastically. Yes, of course. I'll get it ready right away. You'll love it. Without another word, she swept off, leaving Naruto standing there, flustered and confused. Tsuya, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, turned toward him with a sheepish look. Sorry about that, she said. Ka-san can get a little intense sometimes. Yeah, no kidding, Naruto muttered, scratching his head. I'm going to make sure she doesn't go overboard with the reward, Tsuya continued, her voice laced with slight mortification. Have a good night, Naruto-san. She gave him a quick bow before disappearing to find her mother. Naruto stood there, blinking, completely at a loss for words. His face was flushed, and he couldn't quite decide whether to laugh or sigh. Interesting times. One of the shadows whispered behind him. Yeah, broken. Another added. Naruto just sighed, shaking his head as he turned to leave. What had he gotten himself into? The next day came quickly for the blonde genin. After making his way home the previous evening, intent on putting the exuberant woman's antics behind him, he spent the rest of the day relaxing instead of training. Around dinner time, a message from Kurane appeared at his window, delivered by the village's avian messenger service. It was a brief note detailing a meet-up time at the tower and an alert to prepare for a special mission she had selected. Whatever it was, it would last 2 to 3 weeks, so Naruto knew he had to get ready, just as Kurane had instructed them to do. Waking up extra early, Naruto immediately began packing, following the method Kurane had taught them. Extra clothes, spare rations, a bedroll, a tent, and a few dozen kunao and shuriken all went into his pack. Double-checking his gear, he tucked it all into the shadowy pouch inside his bag. Dressed in his typical black and orange jacket, mesh armor shirt, and black pants wrapped in tape, Naruto gave his gear a final once-over before leaving his apartment. Locking the door behind him, he dashed out into the morning air, heading toward the Hokage's tower to meet his team. As he made his way to the meeting spot, Naruto couldn't help but reflect on his progress since that first training session at the Nara clan's compound. He'd been putting in dozens of hours a week, not only on his shadow techniques but also on chakra control. He'd made impressive strides, particularly with the new chakra control exercise Kurenai had taught him. He could now run along the sides of cliffs and trees as easily as if he were on flat ground. His sand pillar exercise, taught by his baker friend, was also progressing well. He'd just managed to create a pillar the size of a Ryo coin this week. He made a mental note to ask Kurenai for more chakra control exercises after the mission was over. Kurenai had been pushing them harder in recent weeks too. The training had gotten more advanced: combat tactics, physical endurance drills, strategy meetings, and much more. His shadow abilities were also improving by leaps and bounds. Just yesterday, he had used a knockout technique without needing a long buildup of energy. He was starting to manipulate the shadows with greater finesse, using fluid, sweeping motions to fight. It wasn't exactly a new jutsu, but more of a mid-range fighting style he was gradually building. Naruto felt proud of his progress. Much of it, he realized, was thanks to Kurenai's teachings. He made a mental note to get her a thank you gift sometime soon. When he arrived at the tower, he spotted his Kunoichi teammate waiting outside. Landing quietly next to her, he greeted her with a soft good morning, Hinata-chan. Hinata jumped in surprise, her cheeks turning pink as she turned to face him. She pressed her index fingers together and shyly greeted him, good morning, Naruto-kun. You been here long? He asked, raising an eyebrow. And no, maybe just a few minutes, she replied, still looking embarrassed. Good. Any idea what this mission is about? Kurenai's message was kind of vague, Naruto asked, leaning against the wall next to her. Hinata shook her head, I'm not sure. Shino-kun thought it might be a sirag, though. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Really? When did he say that? Just 5 minutes ago, Naruto-san. Naruto spun around, startled. Whoa. When did you show up? He asked, pointing at the quiet brunette who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Shino adjusted his sunglasses, his voice tinged with mild irritation. I have been here for some time. Could it be that you failed to notice me, Naruto-san? Naruto scratched his head nervously, realizing he'd been too absorbed in conversation. No way, bud. I just, He trailed off, glancing between the two before deciding to shift the focus back to Hinata. Sirag. Huh. Sounds like fun. I wonder what they'll make us do for that. Behind them, Shino let out a soft grunt and sulked away from the group. Was he blending too well into the background lately? Ignoring Shino's retreat, Naruto and Hinata continued chatting about the possible mission until they grew curious about the tardiness of their last teammate. It was rare for Kurenai to be late, so the delay was noteworthy. 20 minutes passed since the scheduled meeting time, and still no sign of their teacher. Finally, the sound of footsteps reached their ears, and two figures emerged. Walking lazily behind Kurenai was a very groggy-looking Nara, yawning and muttering complaints under his breath. Kurenai herself looked slightly miffed, no doubt from having to drag Shikamaru out of bed. Good morning, everyone. Sorry about the delay. Shikamaru failed to wake up this morning, and his mother asked me to come pick him up, Kurenai explained, giving the Nara a pointed look as he muttered troublesome woman under his breath. No problem, sensei. We haven't been waiting that long, Naruto said with a grin, while Hinata and Shino stood beside him. Great. Let's head inside. The clients are waiting with Hokage-sama, Kurenai said, gesturing for them to follow. The team made their way to the VIP section of the mission office. After receiving the go-ahead from the receptionist, they entered the meeting room, where they found Hiruzen chatting amiably with two women. One was older, dressed in a red flowery kimono, while the younger wore an orange kimono adorned with bluebird patterns. Naruto's eyes widened as the two women turned to greet them. Fun times incoming. Indeed, times were about to get very interesting. Ah, teammate has finally arrived, Hiruzen said, amused at Naruto's surprised expression. Fantastic. I'm so excited to get started, the older woman said with a bright, enthusiastic smile. Kurane had her team line up behind her, bowing in greeting. Teammate, reporting for duty, Hokage-sama. The younger woman stood, her eyes lighting up as she spotted Naruto. Wonderful. It's great to see you again, Naruto-kun. We'll be in your care. She bowed to the team, causing Naruto to freeze, confusion written all over his face. What?